Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm used to speaking really loud in groups like this without a microphone, so if I need to dial it back, just let me know. Can you hear me? Okay, all right. Better? Thought I was going to be too loud. I'm too quiet. Great. Okay, my name's Dylan Kennedy. A little bit about my background. I spent 15 plus years, I think, working on and managing different diversified farms in this state and a few others. I spend most of my time right now working with Mount Folly Enterprises with some things we'll talk about at the end. Career farmer and an accredited professional through the Savory Institute. If anybody's familiar in this room with the work of Alan Savory, that's sort of where the presentation I'm going to be showing you guys is a part of that curriculum. So we'll be taking a little bit of a piece out of that. Here we go. First off, if we're going to start using these words, how many people are tired of buzzwords? All right, we've had plenty of them. And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you guys, too, we cut down about 30 to maybe 40 minutes of travel time in this session because of not being able to go out to the field. So let's just make this a conversation. I might call on some of you if I see some heads down, but if anybody has any questions, feel free just to chime right in. Regenerative grazing, what does that word mean? Why do we use it? Is it just a buzzword? When we use the word regenerative, what we're really talking about is something that improves ecosystem function, right? This is notably different from sustainable, which maintains ecosystem function, right? That's the reason for the kind of new terminology. So what is ecosystem function? It's a holistic process that improves the capacity of natural processes, right? It's a holistic process on a given land base. That could be large, it could be small, but we're just talking about improving that overall ecosystem function, which is a big thing. It's all inclusive. Which one of these two landscapes looks like it has better ecosystem function? Somebody's gonna have to shout it out. The one on the right. Can we just say why? We can see it, right? So this is something that we all intuitively understand, but it's very complex, and when we break it down into pieces, sometimes we miss pieces. Why is it important to a farming operation? Because this ecosystem function is what leads to our forage, clean water, shade, any of the other things that we need in these businesses. So aside from the fact that most of the people in this room probably like pollinators, probably like birds, all the sort of intrinsic value that brings with us from a grazing operation, this is very important to monitor, and a lot of people don't do it. In order to understand this a little bit better, we break ecosystem function down into 4 windows. Now let's remember that this is one holistic process that we view from 4 distinct windows. It just helps the human mind do that a little bit better. Water cycle, mineral cycle, community dynamics, and energy flow. We'll start with the water cycle. That's probably the easiest one for us to get started on. Would have been a good day to monitor some water cycle stuff out in the field today, right? Maybe, depending on how this goes, we might be able to take a quick walk just around the building. As Kenya said, we didn't want to get you all stuck way out in the field and getting poured on, but depending on how this goes, we may get a little bit of time. Water cycles continuously around the planet. We all understand that. This is a global cycle that starts at home. How do we recognize this global cycle on the scale of our farm or a small farm? What are some of the things that we're looking for to give us that hint whether we've got a functioning, well-functioning, or a poorly functioning water cycle? The biggest dead giveaway that we've got poorly functioning water cycle is bare soil, right? And this is something that's we're going to see echo through all of our slides and all of the ecosystem functions. We see bare soil, we've got an idea that something's not functioning there, right? Somebody go ahead and tell me. I said we're going to make this a conversation. What happens when we have a lot of rainfall, say like we got last night on a landscape that looks like this? We get runoff, we get erosion. We can see we've got some compaction, some cracking there, right? How well is that landscape going to store the water that falls on it? Very poorly. We see this in a lot of our agricultural systems, right? I think these are my neighbor's garden beans, but this could easily be any row crops or anything around here. We see a lot of green out there, but in between these rows, how does that water cycle function? How many folks in here, by show of hands, are diversified farmers? Maybe have some livestock, but do some crops and some other things? A decent amount. Okay. What happens in between the rows of beans that we have right here after a hard rain like we got versus what happens in our field, in our pastures? Yeah, let's say we get rain like we had last night and then we get a nice sunny day. What does this ground look like versus our pastures? We dig down into it. It's going to dry out much quicker, right? When it's nice and loose, we might imagine that it infiltrates pretty well, and it may infiltrate pretty well, but it's also going to dry out much, much quicker. So the first key, the major key to noticing if we have a functioning water cycle is, do we have bare soil or not? Luckily, in the pasture world, in the cattle world, we don't have all that bare soil, right? We're mostly working with perennial landscapes. We can see out there, and we've got a lot of plants all the way across that field, right? We're going to encourage everyone to spend a lot more time looking down when they're in their pastures instead of just driving the truck and looking across them. Because while it looks like in this slide right here that we've got an awful lot of cover, when we go to this next one and look down in this exact same pasture, we notice that's what, maybe 40% bare soil? Makes a big difference. We end up with capping, which all the gardeners in here will recognize. A raindrop falls at terminal velocity, something over 30 miles an hour or something. It's pretty hard. When it hits the soil, and this is in a drier area, this is in this is in central Colorado. This would be, it looks like desert. It's technically short grass prairie, but it looks an awful lot like desert. And we see the capping and some of the fungal growth that happens there, signs of an ineffective water cycle. This just sort of illustrates the way those raindrops behave on soil when it's covered versus when it's not covered. 25 miles an hour is pretty quick. One simple test that we can do in our fields, pastures, gardens, whatever, would be a water infiltration test. We do this pretty regularly with ecological outcomes verification. Has anybody ever heard of EOV? It's a pasture assessment tool that we're using. We'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit more at the end. It's something that we're offering to some of our farmers through Climate Smart Grain, and this is some of the data that we collect. How fast does the first inch and, more importantly, the second inch of water infiltrate your soil? You can learn a lot about your holding capacity and runoff by testing that. And so this is just a simulated 1 inch of rain in a given spot. Typically, we do this on four sites throughout a pasture when we're trying to collect that data for a farmer. We do it every 5 years. When that water's sitting there, when it doesn't infiltrate, like we see in the right slide right there, I'm used to moving around a lot too, so if I get away from the microphone, somebody just tell me. I'm used to walking around a lot. What happens to that water? Somebody already said it before. What's going to happen to that water on the right if we don't have it neatly contained with that little mechanism? It's going to run off, right? We're going to get erosion. How many people see things like this on their farms or neighboring properties? This is on my personal farm. This is a spot that we're looking to improve the water cycle on, and we're going to talk a little bit about how that happens. It's gotten a little bit better in the last 2 years since we've been managing it because we're new on that farm. But this is not that uncommon with the topography that we've got around here, right? And we can affect it upland, hopefully. Another spot from our farm, classic pedestaling. When you see that little bit of grass that's held on to just a little bit more soil right around it than all around it, big sign. And it gives you an idea. You can just kind of look how much topsoil used to be there when those trees planted and how much is gone. Signs of an ineffective water cycle. So what do we need to do to improve our water cycle? We need to get the ground covered, right? This is another shot looking down. This is a farm we EOV'd year before last, I believe. And as you can see, lots of living plants. The plant density on this farm was pretty incredible. Oh. Huh. It's working here. Well, I don't know. The slide on the projector doesn't seem to match what I've got on the screen here. Oh no, they're not cycling. Anybody have any clue how we can remedy that? I'm not sure. Okay. No, that's, uh, oh, uh-oh. Oh, no. Wait a second. There we go. All we had to do was hit a bunch of buttons in random succession. Is it working now? Yeah, no, it did. It came back. Yeah, thank you. I hit a bunch of stuff. It figured it out. Thank you. If that happens again, holler at me. Incredible plant density. This farm scored really high on its actual plant density. As you can probably see, also scored really, really high on species counts. Living plants aren't the only way to fix the water cycle. They're the long-term way that we like to get, but in lieu of living plants, we at least want to see thatch, right? We want to see something on the ground that's going to absorb the impact of that rainfall, soak up as much of the water as possible, and allow it to infiltrate down into the soil. Kind of a famous or infamous photo here. Has anybody ever seen this? This comes from White Oak Pastures. It's some of you have probably heard of it. It's another big farm, very well publicized within the Savory network. So we see 2,000 acres run off of relatively clear water coming off of regeneratively managed pastures versus the muddy water coming off about 200 acres of tilled cropland. Right? So we got 10 times the amount of land. I don't know how you quantify the amount of sediment that's in that, but it's noticeable to the eye, right? So this is the difference we can kind of see. All that mud, of course, as well you know, that's in that water came off of your farm, right? It came off of whoever farm owns it. And that's the value. That's your ecosystem processes right there. That's your bank account. Your soil is your bank account as far as ecosystem processes. So, really quickly, what is the number one indicator of an ineffective water cycle? Somebody's got to say it louder than that. Bare soil. All right. What's that? Yeah, I told you I'll make everybody contribute in this. Any questions about the mineral cycle? And remember that we're looking at the same holistic process through 4 windows. So this is just the first one. The second one being our mineral cycle. Right? Mineral cycle would include carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, all of these things that are more specific that work their way through the system in this natural way, but this is the holistic process by which it happens. And the mechanism for nutrient cycling is life, death, birth, regrowth, right? So as things eat, live, have babies, die, are decomposed, and turn back into plants and or animals again, this is the way the mineral cycle works, right? This is the way we bioaccumulate the important micronutrients into our food. That's the mineral cycle. There are a few ways that carbon in particular, another big word to talk about these days, right? Anybody had been in any carbon conversations the last 5 years? Yeah, probably everybody's been in a few carbon. So the carbon cycle is the one that we pay a lot of attention to, and it kind of makes sense. But there are a few ways that this can cycle from our ecosystem through the atmosphere and things like that. We can oxidize grass. It happens very little in our region because we are so humid. We get biological breakdown. But you can see, for instance, even in the broom sedges that everybody is used to that happen out in these fields, you can kind of see when it turns from that orangey color to that gray color, and now it's oxidized. It's actually lost a lot of this directly to the atmosphere. It didn't break down. We can do it through fire. Fire is a tool that we're able to use to manage our landscapes if we choose to. Again, lots of carbon going directly into the atmosphere versus the biological breakdown, which is what we're really looking for in order to long-term cycle this carbon and create topsoil that we can choose to cash in on or cash out of as farmers whenever we want once we understand the tools. This is this is an old friend of mine. His place, the biological picture. Old friend of mine. I hadn't seen him in like 10 years until 2 weeks ago. He's got a diversified farm in Louisiana and doing some pretty interesting stuff, feeding biochar at 3% into his hogs and chickens. It's humid and wet here. It's a lot more humid and wet there. This was the best smell. This was a training pen that he uses to train his feeders, gets them up to about 80 pounds, and then puts them out on a forest rotation. This was the best smelling pig pen I've ever been in. And I don't say that lightly. It was pretty incredible. Very sandy soils there. For us, in practical terms, on our farm, it means managing the soil food web, right? This is something everybody's familiar with. We don't need to spend too much time on that. This just kind of illustrates the way things trickle through the system. Another shot from my farm. This was interesting because we have some livestock guardian donkeys. They did a really good job of taking care of our sheep when we had them for a while. And one day, every pile of donkey manure that was like about 2 weeks old or less just erupted in these little mushrooms. On the exact same day, it wasn't in cattle manure, it wasn't in sheep manure, it wasn't anywhere else, it was just in this donkey manure. I don't know what they are. Don't have any, but I think somebody on like Facebook or something was able to give me a genus that they thought these were in, but I don't know why they happened, but it's just an example of, the way we have these complex systems working with one another, and these are the things that break it down. Going back out to Colorado, we see a typical site in the short grass prairies out there. This is a bison ranch at West Bijou Ranch. It's owned by the Savory Institute. It's a research farm. It's about 8,000 acres. And it was pretty overrun, like many of our farms were. They're working on bringing it back. But what you see here, what do we see? Which way do we see carbon cycling in this picture based on the 3 ways we talked about a couple slides ago? It's oxidation, right? And we see another sign of depleting ecosystem processes because we see this little pedestal of grass right here. These are bunch grasses. And when grasses are allowed to oxidize year after year, these bunch grasses in particular, well, the bunch grasses specifically, they tend to die out from the center because grasses need to be taken back down somehow about every year. Some more, maybe some can go maybe every other year, depending on your context. But this grass plant's actually dying from the inside out because nothing is cycling those nutrients. It went many years just growing, oxidizing, and choking itself out. Here in our part of the country, that doesn't happen that much. What we tend to get is a change of states. So we just tend to start getting into brambles, thorns, vines, and eventually try to go to forest, right? But we can still lose ecosystem function and lose nutrient cycling when we let things go a little too long. This is a site here in central Kentucky. This is a long-standing warm season native grass plot in early winter. And as we can see, we don't really have oxidation happening just yet, but we're starting to get at risk of that happening. So in some way, if we want to maintain our ecosystem function and continue to make that improve, we're going to want to do something to cycle these nutrients, particularly this carbon, before the next growing season. Here's the opposite. This is something that I have a feeling a few people in this room have been seeing in the last few days. Anybody seen any sites like this? I know Mike has, and he's bale grazing now, so he's got a little bit of. What do you think the nutrient cycling is like in a system like this? Situation like that. And this is an operation I manage, by the way. So nobody's perfect. What's nutrient cycling happening like in a situation like this? We got a lot of microorganisms in that, right? I can smell it just by looking at it. It's not like we're devoid of life. We're going to be in an anaerobic situation, right? We're not going to be cycling those nutrients, even though we've got the manure, we've got the moisture, we've got all these natural inputs that lead to breakdown and decomposition. But when we're stressing it that hard, we've got an anaerobic situation, it doesn't have any time to recover, we're going to be in a system where we've got inefficient nutrient cycling. Doesn't mean there aren't nutrients there, right? There's a ton of nutrients there, and what's happening to those? They're cycling in some other way. They're going to be running off if we're talking about our NPs and Ks and things like that. So again, we can, too wet, too dry, depending on how we manage things, we can end up with the similar problems that look very, very different. This is a little bit better situation. We've got a lot of broom sedge. We'd like to get that taken care of, but as you can see, we've had some sort of an event, probably grazing. I can tell you specifically that it was grazing. We didn't quite get all that dried grass knocked down, but you can see that we've gotten in underneath of it. We've opened up space to get some nice regrowth. This is nutrient cycling. we could knock down those stems and seeds, we'd like it a little bit better, but we're doing pretty well here. What's that, Alice? Right. Did everybody hear that? We've got some thatch as well as some new growth, and that's exactly what we're looking for. Oh, I did it again. Go ahead and shout them out if you need to. We're going to have a big open session for questions with everybody at the end, but yeah, if you have specific questions to what anybody's talking about, go ahead.
One question is, how do you balance between thatch and suppressing growth?
Yeah. That's a good question. So I am going to table that question because in this process, we're going to talk about the ecosystem processes, then we're going to talk a little bit about the tools. Like how do we manage those ecosystem processes? And if I can, there we go. So since you spoke up, I'll ask you, what's the best sign of an ineffective mineral cycle? Oxidation is a big one. What happens when we see prolonged oxidation? The terminal state is bare ground, right? So it's pretty easy. We're going to simplify all this. It's a big, completely holistic process. We're going to simplify it down pretty easy. You got bare ground, bad every time, no matter what. Doesn't mean there's not a place for it. You got to drive somewhere. You might need a road. You know, you might have 2 strips of bare ground that go to the back pasture that your tires run on, but bare ground is the enemy. And it's the cause and the effect. It can be the cause and the effect of poor ecosystem processes. Whoops, went too far. So bare ground. All right, thirdly, we've got community dynamics. Community dynamics is a big one, right? It's the way all of the organisms within our system interact with one another. Anyone who came out of traditional conservation schools or things like that, we probably spent your entire curriculum looking into this 25% of the window, right? It's a lot about invasive species versus endemic species and things like that. All that's important, but it's not the entire piece of the picture. It's this piece of the picture. Community dynamics is where we get into our diversity, both in pasture and forage species, and also some of the other indicators that we want to see that our ecosystem is functioning. Could be insects, especially pollinators, birds, whatever that means in your context. For us, in our context, because I have a small farm and I spend a lot of time out on the road doing different things. We don't manage it as intensively as I would like to, as I was used to doing in the past. And we don't produce enough to provide for our family, right? We got to try to stay in the black, but this is by no means the way I make my living or the way my family makes our living. So wildlife is a huge part of why we're doing this. We want to eat good food. We want to stay in the black with our operation, but we use pollinators and ground nesting birds as indicators that we're doing what we want to do. That's within our context. We're not a full-time operational farm. This little flirt of Dexter cattle, donkeys, and hair sheep was as big as we've been on this operation. But it's going to include everything. Anybody run a flirt? Anybody run multi-species in the same time? Interesting community dynamics. Yeah, fun to see. What? That's, people call it a flirt. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a technical term, but, you know, a lot of people call it a flirt. Yeah, it works. There are reasons to do leader-follower. There are reasons to do a flirt. Management-wise, this fits the bill. We can keep everything in one group and move them around. Full disclosure, we do not any longer on my farm have the hair sheep. They were too management intensive for my schedule now that I'm not around. Yeah, and they just like to escape. But they're fantastic ecosystem managers, and if you can utilize them, we'll talk about that in the next few slides a little bit, you can do some really cool things with them that even my small breed Dexters don't necessarily do. How are we doing on time? Plenty? Okay. I just put this slide up here. This is, again, West Bijou, Colorado, Savory Institute Research Ranch. A lot of what we're doing in regenerative grazing was based on knowledge that we got from watching native migratory herds, right? We saw that these were regenerative systems. The bison on the plains didn't overgraze everything, but they were kept in check by natural processes that we no longer have. So bison are a really cool tool to use. If you've got the infrastructure to run bison, I highly recommend it. Not very many people in this state do. It helps when you've got 8,000 acres and no neighbors. This is just a quick, I just wanted to put this graphic up here because this was the most detailed graphic I could find. Got to give, give credit to a friend of mine, Peter Allen in Wisconsin, for that photo or that slide.
Somebody hit the remote in the other room. I'll be right back.
Okay, all right. There we go. I'd just like to include this slide. This is a system study done of a lake. I believe it was actually in Great Britain, but this was the most detailed slide I could find that illustrates how many connections different species in a given ecosystem have. And obviously, we're not going to go in and parse out every single one. We understand it's probably a lot more complex than that, but they were able to study 92 species with 997 links, so that's about 11 links to other species per species, and this is what creates that dynamic community that we're talking about with community dynamics. Well, I guess that kind of said it, right? But it illustrates the complexity of a thriving ecosystem, right? As we all know, you pull that string in nature, everything moves. Nature's resilient because of its complexity. If you were to remove one of these species, it's a self-organizing system. It adapts, it fills in. We get to a point when we remove too many species, we start to get what we call cascading effects. That's an effect of complex systems when they're under extreme stress, but they're naturally resilient. This is what nature gives us that we can build on. It gives us this resilience, and if we're able to work with it, we get the resilience that translates into our businesses and on our farms. Or we can simplify this a lot, have one or two species of forage with one species of grazing animal, and then when something happens, right, what happens then? We have adverse effects. We may not notice it until it hits our financial bottom line, but we can see it in various ways. This is again on our farm where we do use pollinators as an important indicator of how we're doing. Awesome example of community dynamics. These are native brown cowbirds. Now they go on cows, but they evolved to eat flies off a buffalo, right? You got an intact ecosystem. You're probably going to get a little bit of help with these pests. All the organic gardeners know it. Many of our grazers know it too, but it's been a little bit undervalued. What do you have to have aside from bison in order to have these birds that go along with the bison? All of the other things that the birds need, right? They're going to eat a lot of flies, but they need places to make nests. They need nesting materials. They need probably some other food sources too. I'm not sure what their diet consists of, but in order to get this effect that we might call an ecosystem service in this resilient ecosystem, we have to nurture that resilient ecosystem and give these species everything else that they need. Anybody walk out on a misty morning and see this? I've been told that spiders eat more ticks than any other species and that it's not even close, that these little ground nesting spiders are more efficient than turkeys or guineas or anything else. But if you walk out in your pastures on a misty morning, you probably haven't sprayed them a lot, you'll see that. You'll see almost the entire ground covered with these. It kind of gets easy to imagine when you see the scale of it. I think we got some gardeners out here. Some people are used to this, right? Tomato hornworms, they decimate every single tomato on your place until the wasps come out and get them, and then you've got a great tomato crop that goes late into the fall. Some primary decomposers. These are ant hills. This is at Mount Folly Farm just this summer. We're turning a crop field, a traditional crop, or a historical crop field back into pasture. We did a little flash graze in 3 segments on this front field, mostly Johnson grass coming in. Warm season grasses on a former crop field. We'd also sown lawn, actually, some different chicories and some things like that, and we see pretty good community dynamics helping with that breakdown, right? So now we're seeing 2 overlapping ecosystem functions, right? What are the 2? We've got community dynamics coming in and hastening the breakdown, so helping that mineral cycle, right? Remember, 4 windows into the same room. And I like to put this picture up. Here's a friend of mine, another guy in our network, Tyler Green here in Central Kentucky. Don't forget to include yourself in the community dynamics. How many people as farmers spend all their time working on their crops and things like that, and they forget because they've learned things, maybe great things from people like me at a conference like this, and they're trying to apply someone else's system, right? Always remember that you are a part of the community dynamics. And if you ask me, you are the keystone species. I don't care what they say about white oaks and all those things. If we weren't here, they may be the keystone species. But if you're managing the property, you are the keystone species. If you want to cut that white oak tree down, you could. I'm not saying to do it, but you're the keystone species. When you take on that level of responsibility, it's a little bit daunting at first, but it opens up a lot of doors. The last one, and my favorite of the ecosystem processes, is energy flow. Is anybody familiar with this one? Guys work with this? I think a few people in the room may have. All energy, well, I don't say that, right? I think there's like some crazy deep ocean vent stuff where there's like a few extremophiles that live off of geothermal energy or something. But 99% of life on Earth gets its energy directly from the sun, right? The energy flow, and notice we call this a flow and not a cycle. Energy is flowing constantly from the sun to the planet Earth, and how is it harnessed? How do we harness solar energy? Through photosynthesis. All wealth that we are able to generate on this planet, no matter how it's derived, is born initially of the photosynthetic process. Every green leaf that you see is a solar panel. It's a solar panel that turns energy into matter. It's pretty crazy when you think about it, but that's what it does. So let's imagine you had a house, you were off-grid, solar panels were the only source of energy that you had, and you needed more energy. What would you do? You wouldn't have much choice other than to put up more solar panels, right? So what do we see going on here? This is obviously maybe this time of year, maybe a little bit earlier. Crop field, cornfield. Left side, no energy flow. Right side. Right side's cover crop, so we've got some energy flow, right? So remember, if all energy, if all of these ecosystem processes are born of photosynthesis, this is actually dictating, in a way, the carrying capacity of that system. We can only turn as much energy into matter as we can capture. So in the course of time, if we're on the left, we're just we're wasting all this time where we're not getting any ecosystem function. And what are the things that go along with it? You can kind of see some capping. It looks more like washed away on the soil there. Probably a fairly ineffective water cycle, ineffective mineral cycle, versus what difference could we probably infer that the soil would have on the right side? It's probably going to hold on to moisture longer, right? It's going to absorb more moisture when it gets rolled in. And it's got living roots in the soil that are driving community dynamics, right? It's still an ecosystem. It could be more diverse, but there's something there. So time, when we think about the carrying capacity that we have, how often do we have solar panels out there in our fields? Is it just April through November? Is it year-round? What is it? This is, again, on our farm, and we put a little O'Brien post out there. We didn't put it out there. Probably hadn't taken it up yet. It's probably still out there. It gives you a little bit of an idea of how many solar panels we have per square foot, and you can imagine different species, different layers. We're going to absorb a lot more energy, turning that into matter, specifically turning into sugary roots that may slough off or feed other things, but we're turning sunlight into matter. So aside from extending the length of your growing season and how long you have solar panels out there on your ground, what are some other ways that we may actually be able to improve energy flow? And this big way is by layering. How many people are familiar with silvopasture? It's like the next big thing, right? How many people, I'm a big silvopasture proponent. How many people have good silvopasture systems around here? How many people have, do you? Nice, let's talk. There aren't a lot of great examples, right, in the state. Everybody's doing it. There aren't a lot of great examples. Everybody's talking about it. This is one example, an oak member here in Kentucky down around Gamaliel. This is a silvopasture project. It's more mature now than it was then, but we found another way to increase the number of solar panels that we have out on the land by layering. So just like the solar panels that we make are the photovoltaics, photosynthesis is not 100% effective. All the light that hits a leaf all doesn't get absorbed. Actually, a lot of it, more than half of it, gets reflected back somewhere else. Usually it goes right back to the atmosphere. If you've got some tree cover and some leaves, and this is late in the season, some of these trees have already dropped there. This is kind of late summer. But a lot of this sunlight that we see hitting this Johnson grass is actually going to reflect back up. And when these trees still have leaves on the underside, they're actually still capturing. So we're increasing the amount of solar energy that we're able to absorb at any given time. And again, more community dynamics, all the things that are driving. So this is the way we're improving our energy flow. Again, we call it energy flow because it's not really a cycle. The sun is shining on the earth, somewhere on earth, all the time. It never stops. We're capturing all that energy. This energy cycles through our ecosystem via these other cycles, but the flow is what drives it. And it's flowing through the planet Earth. We're losing energy to heat due to heat and light all the time. It's bouncing back off of the Earth. So it's not all staying here. There's way more of it leaving than we can capture. So we've got incredible opportunity to capture as much of this as possible. We can turn it into matter, right? And the best way we like to do that is with trees and topsoil. Turning sunlight into topsoil. That's what this is all about. A little bit different silvopasture situation. We're thinning very slowly some really poor quality woodlands. Again, this is on our farm, into silvopasture. Ideally and in the future, we'll have more sunlight hitting the ground, but this is a way, when we first started, we had essentially bare ground, probably some decent litter because we did have hardwood trees above it, but bare ground or litter underneath, and through slowly opening that up, we're getting that ground cover. So silvopasture would be any system that incorporates trees into a ground-based forage thing. So if you've got enough light hitting the ground to get grasses and forbs and things, but you've still got the trees around contributing to all this ecosystem function, that's what we call silvopasture. And in nature, when we see ecosystems like this, we call them savannas. Savannas are grasslands that have trees interspersed. And an important thing about savannas and savanna ecosystems, I'll try not to talk too much about this right now, is that they have the highest carrying capacities that we know of for wildlife and for building topsoil, particularly the highest carrying capacities for mammals and birds, which is kind of the ecosystems of, since the Ice Age. These are kind of the most productive ecosystems, and they're the ones that humans are the most adapted to. Also happen to contain the species that we farm. So kind of important to mimic savanna ecosystems, or at least to understand them. They give us other opportunities. This is sassafras. This is a little sassafras thicket that we chopped and dropped on our farm in the summer. Had some drought conditions, not the greatest forage, but we've got, I think, roughly 18% crude protein forage above the heads of all these cows. These Irish Dexters are happy to take advantage of that if we give them the opportunity. So again, this was all about increasing energy flow. We see it trickle down to the community dynamics. And ideally, our bottom line, if we're able to keep animals on much higher quality forage through a drought in the summer than they're able to on your typical pasture, August, September. Now, this is very small scale, but there are some scaled versions of this we could talk about, and it's powerful. All of these cycles, they all look the same. This just illustrates that it starts with solar energy. Those are the ecosystem processes. Does anybody have any questions about these? I've made the claim that it's 4 windows into the same process. Is there anybody that disagrees? Anybody that feels like, no, these things aren't the same thing? You don't have to speak up if you don't think so. Find me afterwards. We'll talk about it. I always issue that challenge. If you'd like to show that these are different, let us know. All right, so that's great. That's how our ecosystem functions. Now, what do we do about it? How do we manage this ecosystem function? Well, we've got 4 tools. We've got 4 very broad tools, and we're going to spend most of our time talking about one, but we'll hit on all of them. I want to point out, once again, this is part of the holistic management curriculum, so this is just a little piece of it, and if anybody wants to know more about that, get with me or Alice or some folks at that table after this, because we'll talk about this till the cows come home, literally. But we've got 4 primary tools. We've got technology, rest, fire, and the tool of living organisms. All right, we're going to break those down. Just like with our ecosystem processes, we like to keep things fairly general to start. We do want to notice that it's impossible to use any of these tools without our own creativity. We are the ecosystem, the keystone species in our ecosystem. It's going to take money and or labor. If you got a lot of one, you only need a little of the other, but you got to have some combination of both of them. So quickly going through the types of tools that we have technology. We are a technological species. If I asked everyone before we started this course, describe the tools you use on your farm, I would venture to say that almost every single person would give an answer that fell within this tool of technology. And the other tools that we use, we have to have technology to use. We can't use cattle or other things without fences. There's nothing wrong with these. There are some generalities. Again, they're the most used. They tend to be the quickest fix, not always the long lasting. They tend to do specific jobs, but just like everything else in a complex system, and this goes for our livestock too, there are unintended consequences, right? You pull that string on nature, everything moves. It's not if you're going to have unintended consequences. You are going to have unintended consequences anytime you interact with a complex system. It's about thinking about that, being able to recognize that, hopefully give yourself some monitoring tools to be able to know about that. When it comes to technology, I'm going to just leave the floor to Adam because he's got some pretty cool technological tools he's going to be talking about here in just a little bit. The most misunderstood tool, as far as humans are concerned, the most recent invention of a tool is rest, this idea that we just rest land. It has different effects in different parts of the world. In our arid desert areas, it's had some pretty catastrophic consequences, not so much in humid areas. So we got to know where we are. That's something we don't have time to dig into too much today. Fire, maybe the first recognized tool that we've ever been able to use. It does a pretty good job of driving that mineral cycle, right? It gets those grasses broken down. Community dynamics. We've got some species that are fire dependent that have come through. It's not a bad tool, it's a tool. There are some downsides. It puts a lot of carbon straight back into the atmosphere. Depending on when we use it, we could open ourselves up to erosion issues, compaction issues, things like that, but it's a tool to be used. These are both Kentucky burns I had the opportunity to work on. If you ever get a chance to work on a big open grass burn, do it because it's fun. Whatever you'll say about fire, it's fun to do. And lastly, living organisms, and we're going to dive into this just a little bit more. Living organisms would be anything from seeds, biologicals that you might apply, compost, things like that, planting trees. We're going to focus in on livestock, using livestock as a tool. And again, remember, using livestock as a tool to manage these ecosystem processes. We've already got these. How many people in this room do currently have livestock? I guess I could get a show of hands. It's about half of us, maybe a little bit more. How many of you think of them as a tool? Excellent. All right, speaking to the choir. We're going to break down the way we use the livestock into two main categories. First is grazing, the second is animal impact. First of all, grazing, and we like to cover this a little bit more in the growing season, so we'll hit that. But the way that herbivores, particularly ruminants, interact with grass and forage species is a codependent, co-evolved system. So this grass, we see those roots. We've hinted on it already. What do those roots look like? What are they made out of? They're starchy, right? This is that organic material that's matter that came from solar energy, and they're starchy. And what eats starchy things? Almost every organism we can think of in nature. So the way grazing works, and I'm sure most of you guys already know this, but we're just going to do a quick, is you graze off, say, the top half of that, whatever, you're going to get a corresponding amount of sloughing off, a dying off of the roots. It might not be one-to-one, it might be different, it might vary a little by species, there's a lot of technicality in there, but it's going to slough off a corresponding amount based on what was grazed from the top. Those roots can't support that anymore. All that goes to feed the microorganisms within the soil. You get an explosion of life, driving that mineral cycle, making a lot of more minerals available to everything that then those grasses are able to utilize and grow back a little bit better. Again, soil food webs. And we sort of see across the top there an idea how it goes. You bite it off, roots die off, they push the energy back to the green part of the plant, and then when the plant is recovered, sufficiently recovered, you're going to, those roots, if you were able to look underground, would have been. So what happens if we come back? So let's look at on the top there, those last two illustrations of that grass plant, they look kind of the same, right? Like if you were just looking above the ground, you might not notice that much difference. But what happens to that grass plant when you graze it at that third stage right there before that root recovery has happened? The roots are too shallow. They don't have as much to slough off. They're not going to feed that soil food web as much anymore. And it's going to be a lot longer recovery period than there would have been had you been able to wait until that last phase, right? Easier said than done, but that's the idea of how we build organic matter through grazing. Because this process of roots sloughing off, being taken down by herbivores or some other method, then regrowing over time, cycle and cycle, sequesters a little bit more carbon than it puts back out over time. And that's how topsoil's built. That's how topsoils around the world, the best topsoils we've had, have been built. Yes? The question is, how tall do you recommend the grass to be before you graze the animals on it? That's a great question. That's going to depend a lot on the species of grass, the forage. It might also depend on what you want to do, right? So there may be situations where you want to change the type of forage that you have, say from cool season to warm season or vice versa, when you may overgraze strategically because that's what you want to do, right? Overgrazing it's a bad thing when it happens all the time. It typically isn't a great thing, but if you understand the tools, it can be used to get a good idea, to get where you want to be. So the question would be like, is it annual fescue? Is it Johnson grass? How tall? It could be 18 inches. It could be 8 feet. For normal cool season pastures, we'll talk about that a little bit, and we can ask some of the other experts that we have in the room about that. But typically it's going to be more about what stage the plant's in. So we're going to ideally want to graze our plants when they're in that vegetative state, and just as they're trying to flower or seed, but not after. That's kind of the idea, is to keep it in that most growth, in the most growth phase that we can. And that's going to vary depending on what kind of species we have. And also keep in mind, most of us aren't grazing monocultures. So we might put our animals out there and maybe, who knows, the orchard grass and the fescue might be at that perfect stage, but some other things aren't. So we're managing a lot of complexity. It's not going to be ideal in every situation. We're looking to get those good averages and continue to get better. So, yeah, when you're talking about your cool season pastures, what we're mostly dealing with, usually, it's not up to your knee, maybe somewhere down around here. What? Mike says 8 to 10 inches on his cool season pastures. Adam? Standard is to never go below 4.
It is, at that point, move your livestock. And anything else below, if you can see the nostrils on a cow, move it. Or if you're walking through a pasture and you see the top of your boot, move it. Because at that point, you're going to do damage and you're going to put short roots. They're not putting enough carbohydrates to recover. They're not putting the carbohydrates to withstand changes in climate, whether it's 10 below or a drought or insect pressure. So that's our rule of thumb. If you're going to enter into a program with us, we're going to ask you that no matter what else, rotate it with 4 inches.
There you go. Just illustrates overgrazing. All these plants were brought in at the exact same time from the exact same place, so we're the same when it happened. And what you can see is they've cut some down and then they continued to cut. I can't remember what interval. Some of them they were cutting regularly, so an overgrazing situation where they were coming back and taking that same bite off of that plant every couple days versus getting full recovery, and you can see how the root growth corresponds to that. So basically what's happening here is these plants were never able to get enough solar panels out there collecting that solar energy into photosynthesis to build those carbohydrate roots. How'd we do there, Adam? Yeah, this is at Mount Folly Farm earlier this summer. We had a group out. This is that same crop field that was a crop field and is now being transitioned back into pasture. Warm season grasses, primarily Johnson grass here with some other things that were sown in as we're trying to transition this. But you can see we took a lot of nutrition off of there, left enough to get rapid regrowth, and we had really rapid regrowth right there, didn't we, Juan? We were almost ready to put them in. It wasn't too long. We got them to the other end of the field. It was ready to put them in again. That's just kind of another illustration. Does everybody kind of get the idea of the corresponding sloughing of the roots versus the tops? Great. Okay, what's animal impact? And I like to focus on animal impact in the non-growing season. We have animal impact all the time of year, but in the non-growing season, we're not really grazing, but we still have an awful lot of influence that we can put on our land base through our livestock, and it's mostly through animal impact, and that's going to encompass everything other than the actual grazing. So the grazing is that symbiotic relationship that's developed over eons, and it actually has to do with how the grasses are eaten. Animal impact is the trampling, the dunging, the rubbing, the manuring, everything else that our animals do out in the field. And in the winter, when we're not really grazing, we might have some stockpiles for a part of it, but now we're probably feeding hay or doing some things. There's an awful lot of impact that can happen in those pastures, right? Especially when it gets muddy like this. Here's just a little thought experiment. Say you had a small house and a donkey. You're going up to get the donkey, you get to your well or whatever, and you take the donkey over the same path every single day versus a different route. Is that what it was? Yeah, versus a different route. Or one donkey doing the same path every day versus for 365 days versus 365 donkeys walking that same path one day. Is the impact the same? It's very different, right? And the reason is timing. We've got a lot of different timing. So we could trample that stuff down. So this might translate to animal days per acre, for instance, if we're doing a grazing plan. But we see the animal impact is very different depending on how you utilize them. This is an example, Central Kentucky, a farm I used to manage, and they do burning on restored native grasses here in Central Kentucky. And so things tend to get to that oxidized state before they burn. And I was good friends with the preserve manager. I said, hey, buddy, let's take a little piece of this because I don't have space for all these animals. So we put 3 teams of draft horses. We needed more space for them in the wintertime. Put 3 teams of draft horses out on these native grasses and allowed them, rather than burning it, just to sort of knock this down. So what do we have going on here, right versus left? What can we say in terms of animal impact, and how does that relate to our ecosystem processes? More nutrient cycling on the right? We got biological breakdown. Water cycle was probably fine. Either way, it wasn't going to run off too much. Either way, it's probably pretty good. We don't have photosynthesis happening right here because we don't have any green things going on in the winter, but we were able to get better community dynamics and speed up our nutrient cycle by utilizing some livestock. And did a really good job. I stopped managing that farm this spring after this, so I don't have good after photos of that, unfortunately. Here's a great example, and this is from France. This came from one of the other savory hubs, the 3LM hub in Britain, I believe. This is something that's kind of similar to what some of you guys might see on your land. I see some of this kind of stuff on my land where we've gone into brushy undergrowth, and it looks good from above, but again, when we get underneath, we don't actually have any soil cover, and here we even have very little litter. So like on my farm, I had these tangles and brambles and overgrowth, and you couldn't hardly walk into it, but when you did get into it, you saw a lot of erosion happening, and you couldn't even see it before. That's pretty typical of some of the things that we have around here, and this is a similar climate to ours, not the same. So this is just how it exists naturally, and this is what it looks like after one winter of feeding hay in that area. So they're opening it back up, fed some hay. The residual hay, of course, is litter. That's feeding our community dynamics. It's our nutrient cycle. It's all that good stuff. And even was able to increase energy flow the following year. All right, we got ground cover happening now. We're going to reduce erosion. Yes. I don't know if they scattered some seed or not. I didn't have that information. I could imagine a scenario where they didn't because hay's got a lot of seeds in it, but you could certainly sprinkle some seed around there too. Yes. I can't remember. Yeah, they fed hay in this area. I don't know if it was sheep or cattle. It grows right up out there. Whatever seeds are in your hay, you're going to be planting those. I spent a lot of years organic gardening. That's how I got involved with oak in the first time. I learned pretty early on the best way to sow grass was just to buy straw. Forget about the seed. Just put the straw out. You're starting to get there right off the bat. Some seed's good if you're looking for something specific. But yeah, one way or another, they did import a lot of seed in there without really intending to. They may have intended to as well. This is my farm. This is what it kind of looks like before we run the sheep through. And if you get, you get down underneath of it. This doesn't show really great the erosion that happens in gullies. But I wanted to show the tool of animal impact. There's some nutrients, there's some tasty stuff in there that hair sheep like to get, and they got in there and got it. And I liked following their, especially in the early summer when they're shedding, or mostly all summer, kind of follow them around. They're kind of like slugs. Instead of leaving slimy shells, they just leave these little hair trails all across the farm. It kind of tells you where they've been going. Easy to follow around. But after we do this, we went from something that you can't walk into, and I'll go through a lot of thorns. I'll come out bloody, and you can't get into some of this stuff, but after the animals go in, you can. And they show you exactly where you want to use your chainsaw, use your loppers. You can get in with some technology at that point. And we found it's easier if you put the animals in first, but sometimes we didn't have the opportunity to do that. We found that once we go through with tools of technology and the animals, whatever order they come in, it's a huge difference, right? Once it's been people with tools, just clipping the multiflora, that kind of stuff, and running the animals through, we've seen incredible difference. And this is that larger area. You can see one sort of fallen pine tree that I haven't cleaned up yet, and it's still inhibiting that ground cover from coming up. But there was very little ground cover through this whole area. And those pedestaled grasses at the bases of those roots from many, many slides ago, that's this same area. So we're starting to bring this in, and you can see how we've used the tool of livestock in order to improve our ecosystem processes. This is a pretty typical site, right? Got a lot of bank erosion happening here on the creek. And now we've got a lot of plants growing right up to the edge of the creek, but what do we notice when we look at that cut through? Man, you don't see a lot of root growth down there, do you? And we're not sure why. I don't know exactly what management this was under. But do you think we could use the livestock to improve a situation like this? Is there a way they could do that? Well, first of all, if we really nailed our grazing, we'd have more root depth there, wouldn't we? It might look a lot different if we had 18, 24 inches or more of roots there than we do there, where it looks like we've got maybe 6 inches of roots. So grazing may do it. What about animal impact? This comes straight out of the savory slides. It's a little bit hard left to right, but animals, when they don't get the chance to be like that donkey and follow the same path every single day, they spread out and they tend to mound things over that used to be kind of sharp, right? So they got into the water here. Bad thing, right? You don't want your animals in the water. But what if it's a flash graze? What if they're in there for 12 hours, maybe a day? They didn't have the opportunity to follow one path like that donkey did. They walked all the way down the banks, and you can see on the left, and they're not as steep anymore. And now we've got the opportunity for grass to grow in there. On the right, the animals had access to that too. They just had continual access, and there were a lot fewer of them. How many people have washouts like this on their farm? All right, this is one that's getting a lot better. This is at Heifer USA Ranch in Arkansas. A friend of mine manages this ranch. We do some teaching together. And this is a pretty good example. You can kind of see on the sides the animals have come through here. They're in there for a day, no more. This is a leader-follower system with sheep and cattle. And you can see how this is actually already starting to heal compared to a lot of the washouts that you've seen before. We could maybe do a little bit more in this area, maybe feed a round bale right at the top, right before that water drops off. If you're going to do that, if you're going to use hay to try to fill in these gullies and wash them in, do it at the top of that draw. Don't put it down in the draw. The reason is you want to slow that water down before it dips over, right? Once it goes down, it picks up speed, it picks up sediment, so you want to set that bale up there. You want to slow it down before it dips over. And then maybe you don't do a hay ring. Maybe you let them waste a lot of it and you got some thatch to go over there. But this is a pretty good example that Donna's got going on out at Heifer. This is also Heifer USA, and this is with pigs. So they're not technically grazing animals. They eat a lot of, their digestive systems are more like ours. They eat a lot of different things. They eat some grasses, but they root up and they tear things up, and this is followed behind. This is Shaker Village of Pleasant Hill. I've shown a few pictures there. I used to manage this farm, and I got an interesting picture of animal impact here. I like the snow because it gives us an opportunity to see where our animals have been and what they've been doing. And this is a no-till garden system, right? And so obviously these aren't livestock, these aren't cattle or sheep that are doing this, but we utilize some garden ducks that we keep, manage their animal impact across an organic vegetable operation, and we can build quite a bit of fertility just in the wintertime just by picking our animals, feeding them where we want. What attractants do you have? You've got feed, you've got water, you've got maybe mineral tubs. Think about those. That's where you're telling your animals to go all the time. Use those exactly where you want them, right? Go back to that hay ring. That was when I first started. I was feeding hay just like everybody else. It took a lot of work, right? How many people have big dead spots like that or have ever dealt with them? Everybody probably. It takes a lot of work to get that, right, turned back around. Imagine if you could do something like Mike's going to talk about and just bale graze and have it flat. Have your pastures coming out of the winter looking just as good as they did going into it. What if you can even use that animal impact to improve your pastures the next spring? That's regenerative grazing, and that's the kind of thing we're talking about. And you can do it with ducks in the garden if you want to do that too. Ducks are nice in a garden system if anybody has them because they don't scratch your beds up. They just kind of pat everything down. You don't have to rebuild your beds. It's nice. So, 3 main takeaways of this course. Learn to read the ecosystem processes on your farm. Go out and look. Think of things in terms of water cycle, mineral cycle, community dynamics, and energy flow. Look around and see what can I improve and how they're linked. Take advantage of the free horsepower. That word didn't come about by accident, right? It didn't start off with diesel engines. Horsepower started off with big animals. There's a lot of horsepower out there. If you've got livestock, there's a lot of horsepower working every minute, nearly every minute when they're not sleeping, of every day on your farm. Put it in the place where you want it. Utilize that animal impact in that grazing. And also look down. Just happens to be my favorite species here in Kentucky. My dad and I were driving through the field, and every once in a while, if you look down, you're going to see something that surprises you. This is kind of a funny version of that, but you want to see what happens when you look down. Are you seeing bare ground? You seeing lots of plants? You seeing thatch? Look down. Way too many of our producers get all of their information on their farm by driving by in a pickup truck or going by on a tractor. Get out in your field and look down. Any questions specific to ecosystem processes or the tool of livestock? Yes?
I just want to say, when someone asks a question, can you please
Repeat the question, yes, I'm sorry.
because we are recording and I want that question heard.
Gotcha, thank you. Yes. So we prefer to let the animals do it first because they make the pathways for us. We had to, in places, go in first with tools just simply because I had to run a hotline. So just in order to graze, we cut some big swaths and went through, and we kind of learned a little bit about the landscape that way. And so it's happened both ways. With the animals coming behind you and that, it's going to have a similar effect. I'm sorry, let me repeat that question. She asked me on the several slides ago with the brambles, we said we did livestock and technology, snips and chainsaws, and which one of those two things happened first. And I said it doesn't really matter as from our perspective, we're getting a similar result ecologically, but it definitely matters in terms of our labor. So we love to let the animals do as much of that as we can first. And sometimes it just means taking our mineral tub, and if we got a side-by-side that can do it, just dragging that thing right into the middle of the biggest thicket that we're trying to fight. Make all the animals get to that point, right? So the livestock first, tools second. Ideally, yes.
Hello, okay. The picture with the cow that was like standing in the mud, you know?
Yes.
So what would be like your first step to start solving that problem? Because not only is it a mineral like from the anaerobic environment, but also that can be a sign of a water cycle issue with the puddling of water. So what would be like your first step to navigate that?
Well, let's see, it'd be an interesting way to answer. I mean, the first step I'm going to try to do is think big picture and say, like, okay, this is the situation we're in now. How do I keep this from happening in the future, right? What are some ways I can feed hay? What are some places I can feed hay that can cut down on that? In that situation particularly, I didn't have a better option right there in that winter. So we had to go in the following season in the spring and sow some warm season annuals, and graze some sorghum Sudan, some things like that. And that was our kind of short-term stopgap solution until we could build infrastructure, get to various places on the property, and try to start using that hay feeding as something regenerative rather than something we had to fix. Yes.
I was just curious, what role do you think native grasses play in regenerative grazing?
Yeah, so the question, what role do native grasses play in regenerative grazing? Huge, in my opinion. It depends a lot on what your individual goals are. And that's something the holistic management framework helps us figure out for each individual person. I'd love to get a big section of my farm back into warm season native grasses for a lot of reasons. For one thing, almost every pasture you drive by and see is all cool season grasses, and they're all introduced grasses. A lot of them do good things and have good community dynamics. They grow in times of the year that our native warm seasons don't grow. However, we all go through long periods. In this August, September, we saw a lot of really struggling cool season grass pastures, and we were doing EOV on farms across the state, and we saw a lot of that. So in those situations, were we to have native warm season pastures that were doing all the other great conservation things that we want to see, it would have been an incredible asset for a lot of the farms. Yeah. Anybody else?
When you said you went to warm season annuals after that rough hay situation, why did you pick warm season annuals? And like, is it because of like volume and biomass, and you're trying to like get a lot of carbon to kind of counteract? Or
Yeah, that was one particular field that we would have that would kind of fall in that sacrifice pasture category. A lot of hay had been fed there for years and years before I got there. And so it was kind of the easiest one to say, okay, we're going to continue to hit this one harder. But when you get all those stockpiled nutrients, NPK there, it's just the biomass of like a sorghum Sudan, of a mix that's built around that with some daikon radish and some stuff like that, just absorbs most of that quickly. And then we were able to get more forage out of that, turning it right back around. So we chose that because it was easy. We were gardeners. That seed's really cheap and accessible. Very easy to get that stuff established in a situation like that without having to bring in a seed drill or anything like that. So it fit our context in all ways. And it works pretty well until we got to a point where we could feed hay in a better way. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, we're gonna get a lot of good hay feeding stuff. So bale grazing is awesome. I'm gonna let Mike talk all about that. And in a typical pasture situation, that's probably the best use of your hay. If you got a situation like we do, where we're trying to turn some really scrubby stuff that's not going to be good forest anytime within our lifetimes, we want to get in there and just select for some of our nicer trees and get forage underneath of it. I don't want people to underestimate the power of using hay feeding as a tool to reestablish pastures in places that are probably not doing what you want them to do on your farm. Not good timber, not good forests, and not good pasture. And there's I don't know how much of that you guys may have on your farms, but when you're driving home, you can look out on a lot of these grazelands and see, man, that could be pasture. That's nothing but blackberries and multiflora rose, or honeysuckle, vine and bush honeysuckle, right? There's a lot of that. So, anybody else? All right, I think we're doing pretty good. We're going to move on. I can't remember who's going next. And then at the end, we'll have a chance to talk more about any questions that anybody's got. I don't know how we're doing on time. Oh, we're doing pretty good. Okay, yeah. We may have enough time if it's not raining too hard at the end of this. Maybe we're not going to take everybody out on the hay wagons because we ain't going to stuck in the rain. But if we've got some time, if everybody's done and our questions are answered, we could maybe walk to one of these goat pastures or something. Yeah, just get out, talk about things, look a little bit and talk about the ecosystem processes we can through that. But without further ado, we've got Mike coming up next. we've got Mike Wilson. I will let him introduce himself.
Well, like I said, my name's Mike Wilson. I'm the cow overseer here at KSU, plus I have my own farm and cattle, and I bale graze for, I guess, for several years now. Bear with me, it's the first time I've ever done this, so I've never spoke in public or put anything together like this before, so I'll try not to make it too painful. Is that better? Try it now, okay. How about that? Do we need- How about that? Is that any better? All right. This is my farm. This is a study I done with University of Kentucky on bale grazing. So we've done a high density and a low density, and they are trying to determine the tonnage per acre that you want to do to get the best utilization out of your manure and cow urine and stuff like that. That's a mess. That does happen when you bale graze. I'm kind of showing the good and the bad. That was 2 inches of rain in one afternoon when that happened, and those things happen. But however, it did heal back. I was surprised. By June, you walked out there, you couldn't tell it had ever done it. There's a picture after I moved them. What we do is we take a long field and we put bales in line across it, and then we put poly wire up and just leapfrog the wire all the way across the field. And once they use those bales up, then we just move the wire over to the next section and turn them into a new section. There's just a different view of it. Now, when it gets real muddy like that, what I do personally is, if I'm not doing a study with UK or anything, is I'll bale graze. Like this fall was the perfect time to bale graze. It was dry, and it's ideal. So when it starts getting muddy, I'll bring the cows into the feed pad. And then when it freezes up and gets hard and it's going to stay frozen for a while, then I go back to the field, or if it dries up. So you always want a plan A and a plan B. When I'm doing my poly wire, the best way to do it is just not hook it onto the poly wire, so I don't get a good connection. I wrap it 2 or 3 times and then go around and hook it into the hook. That way, because if you just hook it into the hook, it don't hit off all those little strands real good, and it's going to start arcing, and the first thing you know, you're going to burn your poly wire up. And there's how I sometimes set up my solar panel and wire and the ground wire and stuff like that. There's a grid where we was bale grazing, the first picture I showed you. And then, like I said, when they're there on the left now, and of course, you got your calves that come through. That's just called creep grazing for the calves. And so I would take that poly wire down on the left and then jump over the next set of rows and run it down through. And I do 2 strands of poly wire just in case something knocks the first one down. It keeps from going all through the field. Because if you got a bull in the field, you know what he's going to do with each one of them rows of hay. It's going to be a toy, so it's liable to end up anywhere. And if you're on a hill, you know how they'll push them hay rings down the hill and just scatter your hay? I come up with that idea of putting a steel fence post in the ground and putting a chain around the top. That helps keep from pushing if you're bale grazing on a hill. The field in the back is the field that we bale grazed, and that's what it looked like when I got done grazing that winter. And by bale grazing, you really get your nutrients and stuff out in the field, and when the cow urinates, she urinates a good bit of nitrogen, and that's out in the field. Where if you're on a feed pad and all that's on the feed pad, by the time you spread it out in the field with manure spreader or whatever, if you've lost a lot of your nutrients and nitrogen out of that manure and urine. Here's the field we're currently doing back here in 51 with a study with UK again on this field here. And we have a low density and a high density, and there again, they're monitoring. They went in and pulled soil samples first before we done anything. And so now they're going to go in and pull them when we pull the cows out and do another soil test and see what the difference is between high density and low density feeding. And then we also have a control area there at the bottom that the cows can't get access to, so they're comparing no livestock in it to low-density feeding to high-density feeding. Now, if I was typically doing this on my place, what I would do, instead of all them yellow lines you see goes all the way across is polywire, and then there's the water, I don't know how you use it, laser thing on here, but anyway, the water there on the left and bottom in the center of the field. That's a big problem with bale grazing is water. It's probably one of your biggest obstacles to have water in the right, proper location. But what I would do if I was bale grazing that field without doing a study with UK is I would just went from fence row to fence row and just line my bales up in a row and then leapfrogged all the way across the whole field instead of having two separate paddocks. That's just a picture of taking some hay to the field. Let's see. I think this is video. No, what'd I do? I've never used one of these before. Oh, there's a beam or laser. I'm all the way. Well,
Is this the beginning of the first presentation?
that's the very beginning.
All right, hang on a second. Sorry about that. Oh, you're good. This just keeps happening with this one today. I don't know what's the matter with it.
That's supposed to be a video. I was trying to play the video.
Okay. Just gotta get. Have I caught back up to where you were? You
Not
were
yet.
here?
I think you're next. One more.
There you go.
One more.
One more?
Right there.
Right here?
Yeah, if it's a video and I want to play video on here, what I did.
Just hit click. Just click it forward.
Just click it forward.
There you go.
Now there's an aerial view of 51 back here at where barrel grazing now. That's the high density side. And you can see the distribution of the cow manure all over that field. Now, in the field that we just put them in that one, and all them green spots you see is manure piles that were probably placed there this spring or back in the summer. Now next year, with a better distribution of cow manure, you'll see 15 or 20 times the green spots that you see there. Let's see. Well, there's after they cleaned up 6 rows. We're feeding 6 rows at a time, and that's moving on about every 3.5 or 4 days. That's 30, 22 cows and a bull and 22 calves that's in that field. That's that's the low density side. That's the side they're in now. How long have I used that field? Acres, 12, I believe it is. No, there's 22 mama cows, 22 calves, and 1 bull. And we're moving about every 3 or 4 days. The high density side was 0.65 acres, each lot was. And then the low density side is 1.2 acres for each paddock. This also, it really enhances the soil health and forage production. And it's just another tool in the toolbox to use for feeding. When you want to do this, you want to avoid sensitive areas like low spots or washes, places like that. And you always usually want to pick out your lowest fertility fields and do first. I haven't purchased any commercial fertilizers in years. I couldn't even tell you last time I bought commercial fertilizer for my pastures. Let's see. It increases plant diversity, increases moisture reunion. Another thing too is organic matter. It really builds up your organic matter. And I don't know if anybody's measured organic matter in your field or anything, but if you get 0.25% per year, you're doing pretty good. And for each 1% organic matter you have in your field, that will retain, let's see, I got my notes here. I've kind of gotten offline here. Seemed like it was 20-some thousand gallons per acre that 1% organic matter will retain in water in that field. And if you have good organic matter in your field and we have a drought, you'll see your fields will stay greener longer than maybe your neighbor fields that don't ever do bale grazing or have any kind of organic matter in their fields. Let's see. I guess that's about all I got, unless y'all got any questions or want to discuss anything.
Well, I saw you moving your tractor video. Looks like packed snow. So I guess one of the real advantages is that you're moving all the hay when it's frozen.
Right.
I mean, besides pulling your cattle to a feed pad, and then it looks like beautiful for avoiding the messy hole that Dylan was fighting at Shaker Village.
Yeah, I meant to bring it up. I'm glad you did. That's a good point. So you go in and you set your hay out when it's dry or frozen, and I usually try to do about 3 weeks of feeding or maybe a month ahead at a time. And then once they get close to eating that up, I'll catch another period that it's dry or frozen, then I'll set more out. And that really keeps down on compaction of your soil from going across the tractor. That's one reason I didn't want to go back there today with the tractor and grader blade or wagon, because it's going to compact and make a big mess. And you're only starting your tractor and running it for a few hours instead of starting it every other day or every third day and running 15, 20 minutes cutting off, which is probably one of the hardest things you can do on any kind of equipment, is start it and run it just for 10 or 15 minutes and cut it off in the wintertime. Just kind of got to plan ahead and watch the weather and just do whatever works for you. Anybody got anything else? Or?
Mike, so how long did you feed, like over what length of time? You had 44 total, 45.
Well, like I said, there's, if I can go back that slide or not. There's.
I might have missed that, sorry.
Yeah. Well, shoot. I'm feeding 6 rows at a time, so each one of them blue dots is a row. And I'm feeding 3.5 to 4 days in each lot. So I've done fed all the I started, what was the beginning of that slide, the date on that? 12/20 or something like that, I think is when I started that field. And I just moved them this morning to the third section from the back. Next 6, and then once they clean up 3 of them rings, I'll probably take them up, go ahead and feed the last 3, because we end up with half a section on that last one. I hope you could hear me. I didn't think about the stupid mic. So I'll probably end up getting about 6 weeks feeding off that field. You could. I can't, because once I pull them off there, we're doing this study with UK, they don't want anything back on there until next year. Now I'll graze it this summer. Another thing too on bale grazing, if you can stockpile a field, of course this year there wasn't any stockpiling. I mean, it was just so dry nothing grew. But if you can stockpile a field and have 8 to 10 inches of grass in that field, and then put the hay in there and turn them in there, they'll eat a lot of that grass, and then the taller the grass is, the less disturbance you're going to have with the soil. Like right now back there, where I moved them this morning, they had it muddied up pretty good in a lot they ran now. But like I said, the more stockpile you can get when you put them in on it, the better you're going to be. I was going to mention something else about that. I can't think of what it was now. Oh, another thing I've noticed too is your cattle stay cleaner. You don't have as much mud and stuff on the cows when you're doing rotational grazing. If you're feeding them in even a rock and fabric feedlot, they will stay cleaner. You don't have big old wads of mud swinging off their tails from their switch and stuff like that. Like I said, one of the big advantages is you're getting free fertilized and organic matter built up in your fields. Tractor run time, you're not going out there like last week, and we had 9 below here, so I didn't have to try to worry about starting a cold tractor to set hay out. And I've got some handouts here that was done by a study in North Dakota with NRCS. It's got questions and answers, and it answers a lot of stuff and talks about bale grazing in here. I'll hand them out. I think I got enough for everybody.
We had one more question. Do you like drag your pastures or anything like after, whatever's
chain hire 'em?
left? Do you chain hair them or anything like that?
You can if you want to. One thing you kind of got to watch out for, there's always a lot of hay residue left.
Yeah,
of
so
course,
with
you
the
run that chain
residue-
hire over that hay residue, it's just going to ball up and roll up, and you're going to have clumps of hay. But if you got them spread far enough apart, then yeah, you could take a chain hire and go around those. Another thing too that I do that I don't think NRCS likes it very much, but if I happen to have a bale that's got a lot of weeds in it and there's a lot of residue left, a lot of times I'll just burn it. And nothing else, try to burn the seed heads up so I won't have them in the
Just
field.
burn the spot.
And then if it's real good hay and for some reason they haven't eaten it, a lot of times I'll just take a pitchfork out there and just kind of scatter it out to where it's not going to be slow about returning in grass growth or anything like this or something like that.
Okay, so harrow, burn, and spread it out just by hand with a pitchfork so you don't have those
Right.
dead.
You can call me crazy, but if I'm close to my house bale grazing and I've only got about that much or something, I'll take my lawnmower out there and run over it and just kind of chew it up and chop it up and scatter it out for organic matter.
All right, so figure out a way to scatter.
Everybody's got, whatever notch suits you, then everybody's got their own way of doing things. Right. So other than that, I guess I'll turn it over to the next one. I'll be around if anybody wants to talk about it or think of something you wanted to ask me.
And next we have, what is your name?
Adam Jones.
Adam Jones. I almost said Adam Smith,
While
but
we're switching the presentations over, I want to talk a little bit about Mike. I've been on Mike's farm. I've shot a video on Mike's farm. But the UK grazing study, a lot of you some of you have been participants in USDA grants. There's a grant right now studying bale grazing spread throughout several southeastern states. And Mike touched on a lot of them, but I said what's remarkable is, from representing the federal government, we're trying to check a lot of boxes. We want soil health, we want livestock health, we want to have good, strong forages, we want to reduce erosion. And, if you talk to academics, rarely do you check all the boxes. And bale grazing's one, it checks an awful lot of boxes. I've got photos going back several years now, and when you look at cows, some of Mike's photos, their udders are clean. Okay, that may not mean a lot to some people, but for calves and scours, calf health, that's huge. If you're going to turn around and sell those animals, if it's cow-calf, you want to retain them. If you're doing stockers or they're cull cows and you're going to move them on at a later point in time, they're not clumped up with manure. So when they go through the sale ring, you're going to get a premium price. I've got photos that we visited some farms in February, and then I came back in May. So 90 days later, it was 89, but we'll call it 90 days later, and they were getting ready to take their first cutting of hay. So if you've kept livestock over a winter, you understand that generally where you winter feed isn't usually ready for any sort of production until maybe July, August, September, or even if somebody talk about annuals, it may get rolled into annuals for a while. And bale grazing, because we are moving them, so it's rotational grazing through the winter, you end up 90 days after cattle have been there, they've run through the pattern, you've got uniform manure and urine deposition, now you're ready to take a cutting of hay. And that's fairly remarkable to have livestock exposed outside and still keep that field in what we would consider a normal pattern. So I applaud Mike, all the participants. I applaud their efforts because it is beneficial. Now, like everything else, it's not for everybody, but if it works for you, it's a great opportunity. So, what I bring to the table. My name is Adam Jones. I am the State Grazing Specialist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Natural Resource Conservation Service. I started my career in West Virginia, and the lure of the bluegrass state and the horse capital of the world called me to Kentucky, and I've been here now 18, 19 years. I have the blessing that I get to work with forage producers on a regular basis. I'd like to say every day, and that's just not possible, but so where we all get plugged in is I'm going to talk to you about things you can do. Everything that I'm going to talk about is available online. We have been blessed that a few years ago during COVID, the federal government put a lot of emphasis, there wasn't a lot of other things going on, but working to improve infrastructure from an internet standpoint was possible. A lot of programmers can do that from home. So that's what we did. So if you've worked with us for multiple years, our websites have changed, how we do things have changed, the availability of data has changed, and if you've got everything bookmarked, it's probably not a good thing because the bookmarks don't work now. Apologies. But there's a whole lot more data at your fingertips. So, from a management standpoint, both Dylan and Mike have done a great job talking about what can be done. How does the ecosystem work? What can you do as a practice, whether it's bale grazing? So now we're going to talk a little bit about what tools you have at your fingertips. And to the young woman who was asking about the grazing heights, this is where I'll talk about the difference. We have financial assistance. We also have technical assistance. So I can tell you, you shouldn't go below 4 inches, but there's no contractual obligation. If you're receiving financial assistance, then it does become a contractual obligation. So we're going to be looking for that. So I told you I didn't forget about you. I would follow this. So, brief history, and it actually means something. So this isn't just for your entertainment. In 1932, we had the Dust Bowl. Our founding father, if you will, Hugh Hammond Bennett, used that to his advantage. He went to Washington, D.C., timed his visit there to coincide with the arrival of the dust from Kansas. Was able to quickly encourage Congress, when they looked out the window and they're like, wait, it's dust. So in 35, the Soil Conservation Service was created. In 94, we changed our name to the Natural Resource Conservation Service because we've broadened our scope. Our history was largely on soil erosion, soil loss, a lot like the examples Dylan had in some of his photos. You see that clump of grass and then you got 3 inches. That was 3 inches of soil that's lost. So in 94, we added soil and water and air and plants and animals and humans and energy. But our goal was to deliver conservation solutions. So we work with private landowners. We are not regulatory. So it's not a gotcha moment. If you call and say, hey, Adam, I got this problem. I need some help. Can you come out and look? Myself, it may be somebody from your local office. People will come out and look. It's not a punitive visit. We're here to offer you some solutions. Maybe you want to do it, maybe you don't. We should, I say should because there's 200 and some employees, and we should offer you alternatives. So I always do it, and I thought it always made sense until I realized I'm getting old, that we had kind of the Yugo and the Ford and the Cadillac. And then I did this talk about a year ago, and somebody said, what's a Yugo? And I went, oh, okay. So low inputs, medium inputs, high inputs. It doesn't quite plug my age into this. But, our vision statement, I think we want the same thing most people want. A thriving agricultural community. We want everyone to be effective and achieve your goals. Some people, that's a lifestyle. Some people, it's solely this is how I'm going to make money. But we want you to have that thriving agricultural community. I look at regenerative grazing as a series of practices. It's things we do. It's management. If we do nothing, then we shouldn't expect anything. So to improve pasture productivity, soil health, healthy water cycles. If I came to your farm tomorrow and, I want to know, what's your goal? And that crafts the direction that we head. If you say, my goal is to make as much money as I humanly can, okay, that's going to change how we talk about things versus, well, my goal is to provide a comfortable living for my family, to introduce my family to an outdoor lifestyle, and I love lamb, and I'd like to raise it on my own. Okay. I can help you with some of those. I can't make your family love to be outdoors or in an outdoor lifestyle. But I can help you raise some lamb, and I can help you improve the environment. So, what's your goal? What resources do you have? My talk is largely on the management side and the tools side. So, when I was early in my career, I worked with a family, and they, the chance of genetics. They had their first child that had some developmental disabilities. The physician said 1 in a million, never happened again, and their second child had the same syndrome. And they were distraught. Not because of the children, but they farmed. They ran a dairy operation. So what do we do? How can we do what we've done? And we sat around the kitchen table, which is my favorite place to do work, which is really a weird statement. I'd say a lot of NRCS employees say, I want to get out in the field. I want to be in the timber. I want to be on the lakes. I like to sit around somebody's kitchen table. I want to sit down and just have an honest conversation. I don't want to look at a clock. I don't want, I got another appointment. I want to sit there. I want to unroll maps, handouts, charts, tables, notebooks, and really have a heart-to-heart. What do you want? And that's what we did. We sat down at the kitchen table and said, okay, what are your resources? What do you want? Where do you want to go? Well, we want a dairy. Okay, we want a dairy. So that was our goal. How do we want to do that? Well, we've always raised, corn for silage. Okay. What if we went to a grass-based dairy? Well, what does that entail? Well, that means you're going to rotate your cattle, and the system I laid out had about 75 different paddocks. It's pretty intense. We were rotating them twice a day. They were milked twice a day, so every time they got rotated, they went to a different pasture. The boys were able to ride a four-wheeler. That's a resource. And they move the cattle every day. They are as actively participating in that dairy as anybody else. And they have to get up early. They have to get on the four-wheeler. They know the numbers from 1 to 75, and every year changes a little bit. But they know, open the gate. Like Mike showed a fantastic picture of the electric fence hook. They unhook the fence. Dairy cows get pretty well trained. And they stay behind them. They ride them down the lane. One of the uncles milks. Mom and dad are doing some other things, farm-related. And then when the milking's done, take them back to another pasture. The family is able to keep their business, run it the way they want, although it's a change. Some of their crop ground is used for pasture. Some of their crop ground is just grain for sale. But it allowed them to operate the farm the way they want in a slightly different path, but it's sustainable. And you'll hear that word several times in my talk, that was it what they used to do? No. Is it similar? Yeah. Is it sustainable? Absolutely. And those boys can be an active participant. So instead of what are we going to do, it's, now, well, we probably ought to get them another four-wheeler. Okay. Yeah, that's not a bad goal to have. That's not a bad problem to have. So what tools, calculators, information are available to you? And that is where I come in. That's what I'll spend most of my time on today. This is the question about working for the federal government and having financial resources to offer. What do you want versus what do you need? That is the common question I hear far more than I would like, is the landowner walks through the door, what do you got to give me? Well, you'll see here in a second, we're here to address resource concerns. I'm looking for an environmental issue to tie, if we want to address water quality, then I've got money for water. And if you want to improve pasture health, well, we can plug you in that way. If we want to work on livestock health, what do you got to give me doesn't always fit that way. So we're going to come out and look what you need. What you want may be, I'd like to have a really big barn, and I'd like to have parquet floors, and I'd like to have a lot of windows. Oh, I need some bathrooms in the back. I'm like, are you going to use it for a wedding venue? Well, maybe. Okay. We got to the honesty part real fast. How about we set you up a grazing system with 4 watering troughs and about 3,000 feet of fence and 2 heavy use areas that you can set some hay rings on and feed in the wintertime? Well, yeah, that works. Okay, it's not a wedding venue. But so what do you want versus what do you need? And that's where alternatives come in. As I mentioned earlier, we have technical assistance and financial assistance. If you're like, hey, I've got this wet area and I don't know what to do about it, but if you notice there's some rocks here and there's water that trickles out. I said, oh, you've got a spring. Yeah. Does it run year round? Yeah, it does. Would you like a spring development? Maybe we can put some watering troughs below it. Maybe we can put a catchment basin they can come to drink from. Different alternatives. I'll come out, we can set up engineering equipment, make sure we get the right grade so the water does flow. And if you have a backhoe at your disposal, we can set it up in a matter of a few days. It can be as fancy, it can be as simple as earth and plastic sheeting, and it can be as fancy as cinder blocks and mortar and PVC pipe. And that's technical assistance. That's us giving you advice on what to do and then backing it up with drawings, designs, technical specifications. Financial assistance, understandably, that's much more popular. For this crowd, everybody, all 3 of these rooms. Maybe it's transitioning to organic. Maybe you're not certified organic yet. We can help you with that. Maybe it's a grazing plan. We can help you with that. Maybe it's what cover crop should I do? What type of rotation should I do? We have options there. And we'll talk about those a little bit, but you can Google NRCS financial assistance, and you're going to hear words like RCPP and CSP and EQIP, and all of them are opportunities. The difference is everybody in here from Kentucky? Anybody how many out of state? Okay, so this is why I have to ask this question. Growing up in West Virginia, I could give this talk, and I went back home and given this talk, and there's EQIP, there's financial, it's Environmental Quality Incentive Program. Kentucky, because of the master settlement funds, have EQIP, big federal program. Then they've got state cost share, medium-sized state level program, and then you've got CAPE, the County Agricultural Investment Program, so small county-run programs. So it's kind of funny when I go back and you home, I start with my 3 pots of money speech, and then I'm like, wait, we're in West Virginia, so it's only 1 pot of money. But if you're farming here in Kentucky, there's a lot of alternatives for you to consider. Back to the what do you want versus what do you need. EQIP's not going to pay to help you get a bull or a heifer or a computer to keep records or a squeeze chute to work on your livestock, or CAPE will help you with those. So always, when you're starting to make farm decisions, business decisions, be aware of all your alternatives, because there's a lot of things out there. I say this being a parent of a teenager. In this case, the internet is your friend. I'm hesitant to say that at times, but in this case, the internet's your friend, and most everything I'm going to talk about here in the next couple slides are available on the internet. And then lastly, there's specialist assistance versus generalists. There's 120 counties. There's 121 conservation districts in Kentucky. We have 58 service centers spread across the state. So you can get service about anywhere. Sometimes you'll get the person that's sitting in that county, and sometimes you may get an agronomist from 2 counties over, or maybe you want to cite something and you're just like, I don't know what's below here and I need a soil scientist. We've got resource soil scientists spread throughout the state. They'll show up with a probe truck and they'll start punching holes in your ground. So avoid this because you're 3 foot from rock. Or, we've got a lot of clay here. This might not be the best spot for that. Or, you can get a lot of quick data real fast. It just may not be the person you see all the time. And then if it's grazing, it may be me, and I'll come from Lexington. So the heart of what we do is conservation planning. We want to work with you on a plan that takes you from where you're at to where you want to go, and it's kind of a roadmap. How do you want to get there? It's your plan. It's a living plan. And 3 years from now, you'll be like, hey, I went to a conference and they talked about this, and that's what I want to do. Okay, we can change that. It's just pen and ink. I mean, it's not written in blood. We can do that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes if you're involved in a contract, a financial contract, that's a little harder to change, although they can be modified as well. But the conservation plan is to grow with your operation. If you start out doing vegetables and then you're like, I think I want to do organic eggs. And I like the eggs so much, I think I'm going to do organic milk. It's fine. We can roll with you as you go through that and see you grow. The greatest thing for me is to go in the offices and start opening file cabinets. And I'll see the producer I'm working with and their father and their grandfather. And I get to see coworkers that trained me 20 years ago, that one in particular, he had a background in drafting. So all his designs are works of art. Matter of fact, I have one framed. It's a skill that he learned, he learned to be a draftsman. So his penmanship and drawing is amazing. And it was an art, at that point to him, it was an art. It was, that's what he loved. And he incorporated that. If you received a map made by him, it was amazing. Mine are done with a Sharpie, and it's probably in a truck that's bouncing through a pasture field. And I'm improving my game. I've got 3 colors of Sharpies now. So, but it's still a map, and you can figure out where the water line's going to be, where the fences are going to be, and where the watering trough's going to be. But your plan can grow with you. So what tools do we have? Dylan talked about livestock as a tool, the ecosystem as a tool. I'm going to talk a little bit more about things you have at your fingertips and what you can do to guide you as you make decisions. That's why the kitchen table to me is so important. A lot of these things, you have a brochure on Web Soil Survey. How many people in here have used Web Soil Survey? About half. Okay. Go home and play with it. Take 30 minutes less Facebook time, I'm not even going to challenge you that hard. 10 minutes less Facebook time, and take 10 minutes, go to Web Soil Survey, draw the area of interest around your farm. And if you don't own a farm yet, that's fine. Pick a piece of ground. Pick a piece of ground you've driven by and you think, boy, if I could just win the lottery, I'd buy that farm. And then go in and start playing around with, where can I build a house? Where can I put a septic system? Where can I put a pond? What's the productivity if I have it in corn? What's the productivity if I have it in grass? What's the soil types? What's the pasture and hayland suitability groups? All that and more is at your fingertips. And it's just a matter of playing with it. Set at your kitchen table and design the farm of your dreams. And then open up your checkbook, and that dates me. A lot of people here probably don't have a checkbook anymore. But open up your checkbook and say, well, I can't have the farm of my dreams. I can have the farm of my checkbook. But play around with Web Soil Survey. I mean, it's phenomenal. The information's there. And then, somebody asked Mike how many acres are in one of those fields. You can quickly determine that. You can take your farm a field at a time, and if you've got a lot of ink in your printer, you print out each field and know the differences on a field that's on the top of the ridge versus a field that's down in the creek bottom. What's the productivity potential difference? How different are the soil types? So once it's something you can do at your kitchen table, it's free. So throughout my life, I've learned a lot of expensive mistakes because I did something that didn't work, and I had to go do it again. Web Soil Survey is free. Our NRCS soil scientists can come out and help you. If you think, Web Soil Survey says I may hit rock at 3 feet, then you can field proof it. Then you can bring somebody out, they got a probe truck, and they can, anywhere they can drive the truck, they can probe. And if they can't drive a truck there, you probably won't get 6 feet, but they'll still auger down to 3 by hand. So, we can back up if there's something you want to do. Is it possible? Second website, Field Office Technical Guide. Everything technology that NRCS has is on FOTG. If you want to know about the grazing heights, what we call stop grazing heights and start grazing heights, FOTG. You want to know about seed poundage, how many pounds of seed for a particular cover crop, FOTG. You want to know about the typical climate patterns for your county, FOTG. Everything that we do, standards, specifications, drawings, tools, most of the handouts that you have are on FOTG. I was blessed, I've got my own little section on there. It's at your fingertips. So you can do a lot of research before you spend money. In there, I talk about conservation practice standards, pasture condition score, Kentucky Graze. The bottom two I'm going to spend a lot of time today on. Some things you do on your own, GPS and online measurements. If you don't have a GPS unit and you have a smartphone, you can probably get an app for that. Matter of fact, I know you can get an app for that. If you take photos, you've got the metadata, so you can go back and take a photo from that same spot a year later. Great opportunities to say, I have worked all year on this pasture. I've had goats in it to take the woodies. I've had sheep in it to take some of the forbs, and now I'm going to put cattle in it. Take some photos. Look at what has changed, and then do pasture condition score. How much did I get from my efforts? People tend to forget that farming is an independent business. It may not always make money, and it may be more about a lifestyle, but you're having inputs, and you should get something from your inputs. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But every person you've talked to that's ever farms had a failure. So I did this and it didn't work. What did you learn? Don't do it again. I did this and it looked pretty good this year. Well, let's see what it looks like next year. Crop scouting. Are you doing, especially if you're doing vegetables, which you may not be in this room if you're doing vegetables, what pests are in your vegetables? What pests are in your forages? Is it an invasive snapping turtle? What do you have? If you're selling animals, if you're selling them on the market, what were the sale weights? If you're selling them to be processed, what were the carcass weights? And these are simply for the fact that, okay, I don't have a lot of legumes in my pasture, and my lambs, my market lambs sold at 87 pounds. Or maybe the hanging weight was 68 pounds. And this winter, we had, this would be a good winter so far. I frost seeded some clover. I got out and I applied a few pounds of white clover and a few pounds of red clover per acre. I had my grandkids with me. I rode all over the place on a side-by-side. We had a great time, big fun, and I got some farm work done. The next year you sell your lambs and the hanging weights are 78 pounds. Lambs are 10 pounds heavier. Is that solely because of the clover? Maybe not. But you did something and you have a result. Let's see how it works moving forward. It's not grand, PhD research, but it is saying I did something and what are my benefits? It may be as simple as I used to rotate once a week and now I rotate once every 3 days. I make hay and I got 3 extra bales. Now, some of that may be weather related, we can't control. Some of it may be how we managed it. Forage ID and clippings. You have a step point method worksheet. Sometime if you have a farm and you want to get out and take a walk and just every step, what's at the tip of your toe? Or when I was a kid, they had lawn darts. They're probably outlawed now because it had some accidents related to it. But buy you a survey flag and just throw it. Throw a stick, something you can find. Throw a tennis ball that you can find. Anything, just to pick a point in the field and identify what it touches. And you do that 25 times, and then multiply that by 4, now you have percentages. My pasture composition is 42% tall fescue. Okay, now that's good science. Now we know that 42% of it's a cool season grass. Depending on what I'm going to do with it, maybe something I want, maybe not. But you now have some data. And then you can take the next step and start doing clippings. Go to YouTube. YouTube's your friend most times. But you can do different size meter quadrats. I've got one that's small and made out of PVC pipe so I can fling it. And where it lands, I clip. And I can take that back and I use a microwave to dry it. And I know if you do 10 or so of those, you start getting an idea of how much forage is available in that pasture. So then I can set up a stocking rate and say, I know what's there, and I got a pretty good idea what they're going to eat. I can start building a balance. And we're going to talk about a forage livestock balance here in a second. And avail yourself of opportunities. There's financial assistance, transitioning to organics, different practices, cover crops, fence, water, high tunnels, heavy use areas, pasture seeding, USDA organic. You can start looking through, I watch the mic, so there we go. Different opportunities. What is available for organic producers? And then under the opportunities, another website if you're taking notes, KY or Kentucky Forages. It's a website UK has, but it's not solely UK based. There's grazing schools. So if livestock isn't your thing, but you think you want it to be, every April, every September, we have a grazing school. Aprils tend to be in Princeton. Septembers tend to be in Versailles. Go to a grazing school. My colleague in Tennessee, although I always gave him a hard time because he farmed in Kentucky, Greg Brand has a pasture walk every October. There's conferences. A few weeks ago was American Forage and Grassland Conference down in Mobile. Go to conferences. Listen. Come to the Oak Conference. There's lots of opportunities to get education. Some extension offices have winter schools. There's just lots of meetings. Today in Flemingsburg there was a crop school. There's lots of different meetings. Avail yourselves of them. Most of them are low cost or no cost. It's as important of what you hear from the person at the front of the room as the conversations you have with the people all over the room. So let's do some specific tools and really what you can do and what you can get. Web soil survey is simple. When you're on a computer screen, you hit that big green button. The instructions are written right over here. So if you want to know what to do, it's all right there. And then don't jump in. You can't make a mistake. It's not some kind of Microsoft tool. They're going to charge you $99 to, if you delete it off. But what you look for, here's a map unit description. So that's the soils you have. And then you're going to get information such as a pasture and haling group, PHG. And in this case, it's moderately, let's see, I got to take my glasses off. Moderately well-drained soils with the fragipane. Moderately well-drained silt-loam fragipane soils of the uplands and stream terraces. Slope 0 to 12%. Moderate to high productivity potential. So Mike had a great comment, and then somebody else asked about native warm season grasses. When you start seeing, and this is why it's part of my discussion, here's all the pasture and haling suitability groups. So they will tell you moderate to high productivity potential, moderate productivity potential, low productivity potential. When you're having your kitchen table discussions, if you're going to spend money in the right place. If your goal is higher quality forage, that's probably not the seed to put on a low productivity potential soil. If you want to experiment with native warm season grasses that have much lower fertility needs, that might be a spot to try. If you're wanting, like Mike talked about, to improve your fertility, Then maybe you want to go someplace that has moderate productivity potential, but it's not going to be a really clay soil. It's not going to be a fragipan soil that's going to hold water at a certain level. You pick the right soil, and you can't always pick because soil types vary across fields. But use this as information as when you make decisions. What does my soil potential? If I'm going to spend a lot of money, do I want to spend it in a place that's going to give me a low return? And that's at your fingertips. You can go through, and if you do a brief wow. So a map unit description brief, you can look at what is the soil suitability groups and what's the productivity potential. How do I want to spend my money? Field Office Technical Guide. It's divided into 5 sections. Here's the kind of the synopsis of what each section is. More often than not, you're going to be in section 4, supporting documents, practice standards. There's some natural and cultural resource information in section 2. Hydric soils, cropland water tables, wildlife. But this is the website. When you go to it, you select any state. So this is what's always been interesting to me is how many people call me, and I look at the number, and I'm like, it's not an area code I recognize. And they're like, I'm calling from Utah, and I was on your FOTG, and I see that you all do this. Can you give me some information? Well, most certainly I can. So you don't have to go to Kentucky or wherever you live. You can look at FOTG anywhere because every state, your FOTG is yours and yours alone. So nationally, you have a national standard. I can't make Kentucky standards more lenient than the national standards, but I can add relevant information that is specific to Kentucky into those standards. So it's a great opportunity to, how is Utah doing prescribed grazing versus how is Kentucky doing prescribed grazing? Climate data, forage suitability groups, soils information, all that's in section 2. Section 4, this is where we really get into ecological science tools, engineering specifications. If you're going to build a high tunnel, what's the snow load of a high tunnel? What are we doing? If we want to do, okay, if you're going to do livestock, it's not easy to talk about. You may have death of your livestock. What should I do for animal mortality? There's a section in here on animal mortality. Near and dear to my heart is the grazing section. Kentucky Graze 2022. There's also an older version if you have an older computer, or you're wanting to see. My grandfather was basing his decisions on this information. What do I have? But instructions on how to use Kentucky Graze. A lot of good information. It's at your fingertips. You print it out. If you don't want to print it out, just read it there. Cut and paste. The key of it is it doesn't cost anything. You can make decisions at your kitchen table or think about it at the kitchen table and then go to sleep that night and say, wake up next morning, I don't want to do that. I don't feel like doing that. We're working with resource concerns, expected degradation of soil, water, air, plants, animals, to the extent the sustainability or intended use of the resource is impaired. So this is where we go back to early in my slides. I talked about wants and needs. We're going to try to fix resource concerns. You have the pasture and pasture condition score handbook, each of you. 15 of our 47 resource concerns can be addressed through pasture practices. I think that's one of Mike's calves, as a matter of fact. When to do pasture condition scoring? Technically, I'm supposed to say it's a benchmark of the condition of the pasture. In reality, use it as an economic tool. Here's what it looked like before I did something. Here's what it looked like after I did something. Here's what it looks like every May to know, is my pasture getting healthier? The forms, if you look through the guide, it's the last 2 pages of the guide, but there's a section in there, it tells you, take a shovel, dig the soil up. How many earthworms do you have? It looks at the soil health, not just the forage health. we talked about open spaces, and earlier there's been some pictures of a pasture that has a lot of open space. What do we do about that? Because that can be a blessing. If you're wanting to frost seed clover, that's a place clover can go into. If you're in June and you know that there's a lot of weeds that are about to go to seed, that's not a good thing. So what do I see? And then more importantly, most of you aren't forage professionals, so there's a lot of pictures to say this is what it looks like to help calibrate your eye. Evaluate the effects of a conservation practice. Assessments, economics. I did this, what's the benefit? Percent legumes. Because some of you may raise sheep and goats, some of you may have horses, some of you may have cattle. Percent legumes becomes an issue. You don't want too much because especially sheep, they can bloat. But you want enough to give protein in their diet to have growth and produce more milk. So how do you calibrate your eye? And there's paragraphs about it, so I'm not going to beleaguer this point. But to help you make decisions on what do I have, what do I want. But the clovers are kind of deceiving. There's leaves on top and then a long, narrow stem. So there's a lot of tips on these guides. What you see may not always be what's there. Livestock concentration areas. How do you score that? That's a really vague concept. What am I trying to do? So they got an artist and they put some diagrams in there, which is really helpful to say what's the difference between a 2-point rating and a 4-point rating. As you go through the sheet, if you do the online version, they tally for you, but you can, you do it in paper version. Either way, once you get a total, right here, it's going to give you some tips. So where is management beneficial? And then on the upper range of it, you're not going to get a lot for the benefits you're putting in. You're doing a really good job. So the more you spend may not get you more benefits. You've kind of reached a plateau. Now, that's not saying I need to degrade that pasture so I can get more benefits. It's just that pat yourself on the back because you've done a pretty good job. Step point method, really, really handy just to determine what do I have. It will change over time on its own, and Dylan showed some slides where you go through the vegetation. And if you went to the same site, and we do it, it's called National Resource Inventory. There's points all over the nation, all over Kentucky, and we visit them every year. And we take the same data every year. And it's kind of neat. You go back, and it's tobacco, and it's tobacco and how many plants per acre and what's the expected yield. And then the landowner dies, and somebody leases it for corn. Corn. How many plants per acre, expected yield, soil data, all that. And then you go back in next year and the person that leased it for corn is no longer there, and now somebody's got it in alfalfa or they've got it in pasture. And it's really neat to see how it changes. And in some of them that it was in tobacco, and then for a few years it was in hay, and then this last year it was in walnut trees. Now the walnut trees weren't intentional. It's just they've quit managing it, and I suspect if I came back in 30 more years, it would be mature walnuts and maybe some oak hickory. But we're doing that, so nationally we can say this is the state of our ground and this is what's going on. Conservation practice standards. This is what we have to adhere to. This is the basic level of treatment. My career kind of hangs on these. I can't come out to your farm and say, and I'll give you a good example. Miss, you were talking about financial assistance versus technical assistance. We had a landowner entered into a contract with us to put in a watering system. Quite common. And because I have no idea how many hundreds or thousands I've inspected over my career, I anticipate it's black pipe or white pipe. You know, it's PVC or it just water pipe's water pipe. And I ask him, and most of my landowners, leave a section open so I can see the pipe. I take a picture of it. That goes in the folder to say, yeah, it was SDR, this, PVC, Schedule 80, SDR. And he didn't have a section open. And I thought, well, okay, that's not the end of the world. So in the valve box, if you put a water trough in, I always recommend putting a valve box in. If you get a leak, you can shut the water off. I looked down in the valve box, well, the pipe was gray. Kind of weird, but okay. So I thought, well, so I get down, I look a little closely, and it says electrical conduit. So I waited, and I thought, you know, I probably need to talk to him about this. So I waited till he got home from work, sat in his driveway for about 2 hours. And I said, hey, you've got electrical conduit as water pipe. He's like, shh, I took it from work. I said, well, that's a problem, but the bigger problem is I'm not going to pay you for it because that's not water pipe. He's like, but it flows water well. Like, I glued all the joints. I said, what goes on between you and your employer is none of my business. But we're not going to pay you because it's not in the standards and specifications. So you've got two options. We just don't pay you for it, and you've got a working watering trough, or we go down a different path. And he was quick to say, yeah, I think I'll just have a working watering trough. So standards and specifications are what we have to hold you to. If you do something different and we're not in a financial contract, add a girl, add a boy, you got water that flows. Electric fence, it's shocking, no pun intended, to me what people use for electric fence. Traditional fence, I write waivers every year for people that have abnormal or outside spec materials. I have an engineer on staff, and we talk about the inherent strengths, and then I call people in Texas, or I call people in Oklahoma, or I call people in Montana, and say, hey, you know, they built this fence out of gas line pipe, you know, actually what they call drill stem, really thick-walled steel pipe. And it's rugged. It's not something we commonly do here, but it's an alternative. I mean, I have to go, there's a process, but it meets our strength standards. It's just an abnormal material. So this is why you ask about 4 inches. So we have standards on grazing, on start grazing heights, which is generally, and exactly what Dylan and Mike are doing. It's at what sometimes we call the boot stage, where we're getting high nutrition. You want to start grazing it, and then you need to stop here. So you'll see a chart, and it's start grazing and stop grazing. But conservation practice standards are what we have to adhere to, and they've got a lot of good information for you all as to, you know, what's going on, why are we doing this, what's the goals, how much water do cattle need in the summer, how much water do cattle need in the winter, how are you going to supply that water, you know, animal mortality facilities, trails and walkways, watering facilities. Mike does a great job with trails and walkways. You know, it's just the basic information is at your fingertips. We call this an implementation requirement. Our employees will write this for a landowner, and this is what you need to do to implement, and in this case, prescribed grazing. So, you know, some of it's really simple, you know, animals, what's your goals, what do you have, planned practices that you want to do, that you haven't done, production estimates, forage livestock balance. I'll show you that here in a second through Kentucky Graze. Grazing plan, you know, rotate every 3 days, or rotate when grass is this tall, and it's a 5-page document. It walks you through, you know, all the things, or maybe not all the things, but most of the things you need to know to effectively graze your farm with good handy tips and how to keep doing it and keep it effective. The one thing people don't think about is, what are you going to do in a bad event? Okay, so Mike talked about -9. We had -10 at my house previous Sunday. You know, what do you do when it gets that cold? What do you do if you have a fire? What do you do if you have some sort of a disease outbreak? Always be aware that bad things can happen, and what's my contingency? Growing up with cattle and hogs and sheep and livestock, all contingency was you sell them. You gather them up, put them on a trailer, and say adios. Send them on their way. Then I came to Kentucky, and it's the horse capital of the world, and horses are different. That's more of a pet and more of an emotional bond. So I quickly learned you don't say goodbye. See you later. Hope your next home's better than this one. You know, I've got to find an alternative. So my contingencies are, board it at the horse farm, three houses down. Okay, so when and if something happens, you've already got a plan written out of what you can do and how you can do it. How are we doing? Are we doing okay? Okay, this is kind of a game, not in a sense for entertainment, but it's a what if. I'm going to run through this. I've got a lot. This is numbers to play with, and then after we finish up, if you all want to run through others, I can open up my laptop and we can run through as many as you want. But it was shocking to me how many people, when they call me with questions, it's not on their place. It's on the place that they're eyeing to buy or eyeing to lease, or my mother-in-law is not feeling well, and I think I may inherit her farm. What? I'm like, it's kind of weird, but okay, let's roll. You've already seen web soil survey, so run web soil survey beforehand to get your pasture and hayland suitability groups. And simple questions, what animals? Cow-calf pairs, bulls, horses, sheep, goats, stockers. If you're doing stockers, then you can come down here and put in, if you put an entry in this box, then this shows up, and you just click yes or no as to what months you want to have stockers. If you want to do the traditional method and bring them in April and take them out in October, that's fine. If you want to do something different, that's fine. But we can put in some information so when we're balancing the forage that you have versus the livestock that you have, it's accurately representing what you're doing. And it accurately represents the differences in what goats eat versus sheep versus cattle versus horses. Then we go to there's 9 tabs. First tab is just client information. Second tab's livestock. Now we get into forages. All these are drop down, so you don't have to type them in, and it's a lengthy list. Field names, do something that you know. Having worked with Farm Service Agency and NRCS through 20 plus years, they're very regimented. Field 1, Field 1A, Field 2, 3, 6A, 9, 36, 42. Does that mean anything to you? It might. You may know exactly where Field 7 is. And it may not mean a thing in the world to you, and you're doing it at your kitchen table, and the field that's got the big oak, the field where I slipped on the rock and broke my elbow, that big turtle field, however you know it as, behind the house field. It doesn't matter what it is. Things that you know, Kentucky Graze or some different softwares can get you the acres of those fields. Soil suitability groups, that's your pasture and hayland suitability group. Is it a 1? Is it a 13? Is it a 6? And that has a dramatic impact because of that productivity potential on how much forage you can grow there. Your management level. And basically it's how well are you taking care of the land? Are you doing soil tests? Are you working to improve fertility? Did you just inherit it and you have no idea it was done in the past? So it may be you're like, well, I think this is a low. I think maybe it's a medium. Or I've done an amazing job and it could be a high. That will impact the amount of forage you have. The kind of forages, there's a long list. You can play with them. You can do a current, and you can do if I had money in my pocket, how would I improve it? Would I want orchard grass and red clover everywhere? Maybe. Maybe I want maybe your goal isn't orchard grass. Maybe it's big blue stem. Maybe I want some native warm season grasses. Maybe I want more of an annual like Eastern Gamma grass, sorghum Sudan, something. Your grazing efficiency, you can see down here there's little handy guides. If you're continuously grazing, your efficiency is somewhere going to be 30 to 40%. A 7-day rotation is going to be somewhere 45 to 55. 3-day rotations 55 to 65, and if you're rotating every day, you're going to get somewhere about 65% of the available forage. And that takes you to, a big chart looks kind of intimidating. In reality, it's not. It's just telling you, how much forage you have, total forage. Up here you can put what's my minimum grazing days and maximum, and that changes. Is it cool season grasses? Is it warm season grasses? What are my goals? Am I really wanting to take what grass I have and reseed because I've got a lot of open areas? This kind of goes back to what are your goals? Or I've got a lot of stuff in there I don't like, and I think next year I'm going to reseed it, so maybe I'm going to graze a little shorter. That's fine. Graze it a little more frequently, a little shorter, simply because I intend to renovate this into something else. And that's a goal. That's fine. But you can put in how many days that you want minimum and maximum, and then it's going to tell you how often to rotate. Here's your minimum grazing heights. Some of those forages are 3 inches. Some of them are 4. Are they cool seasons or warm seasons? Minimum grazing period, so you want to be in there at least 3 days, but not to exceed 13 days. By your inputs, you can start crafting a grazing plan. I'm going to be in this field for 3 days because of the acreage. And then I'm going to be in this field 6 days because it's twice as big. And it may have something to do with what forages are in there. But it's going to give you some ideas. Now, these are at your kitchen table. These are printed out on a computer. You have some ground truth to that. If it says 3 days and you show up on day 3 and there's still this much grass left, leave them another day or 2. On day 2, if you can hear them bawling from the house, go take a look and see what's going on. They may have eaten all the groceries. When you can look out in that and not only can you see their nose, but you can see their bottom teeth as they're trying to eat, get them out, move them. But then note, somewhere on that piece of paper or in your computer, note, this field, 3 days was 3 days was too much, should have been 2. So that next year you'll know, let's do something a little differently. If you're just getting into this, what's my carrying capacities? Once again, they're decimals. I've never seen somebody have a living 8.3 cow. The 8 is fine. The 0.3 cow, not real lively. They're estimates. Maybe you can get by with 10, okay? And maybe you can only get by with 7, okay? But, how long are you going to graze? Maybe it's something that, Dylan talked about bringing some draft horses in on a field. Maybe you're not going to be there 365 days. So these are some carrying capacities are a good starting point. It may not be perfect, and maybe it's a little plus or minus, but it's a place to start and say, okay, I don't really want, if my carrying capacity is 8.3 or in this case 11.4 because I've got sheep and goats or sheep and cattle, and I don't want to show up with a trailer with 37 animals. That's probably not going to work. And that point alone causes more heartburn with farmers than anything else we run into. Somewhere they went somewhere and read something that said, I can have 1 animal to 1 acre. Well, high intensity grazing, really good forages, you're only going to have them there 6 months, maybe. You're going to do cow-calf and you want to take hay on the place, you're probably going to need 1 animal to 3, maybe 4 acres. So that's the angry phone calls I get. That's where we go to real fast. If you're a visual learner and you like graphs, here's the graph. The orange is what your livestock need. The blue is what your pasture can produce. And this is kind of a teaching point for all of us, because here in August, September, you see that summer slump. This would be a great opportunity to fill that with some native warm season grasses. You've got this wintertime. We know we don't have production there. We can stockpile some forages. We can do bale grazing and keep them grazing through that. Stockpiling, they're eating vegetation that's in the field, bale grazing, you're bringing it to them, but you can start seeing some information. Here's some information. We start to look at what, if you're running this operation, you're going to need about 39 tons of hay. Okay, so back to that checkbook, what your checkbook says you can do. If you're like, my college roommate lives just one farm over and they don't do anything but hunt birds on their place. Well, maybe you can get a May cutting a hay off their place. Maybe you can do bulldozer work for somebody in exchange for hay. I don't know. Or maybe you just order it online and buy it and they deliver it. But it gives you some information of what am I going to need? And then that leads us to some economic calculations. What is your cost to buy hay? And then this is going to help you say, okay, how much is my feed cost for the year going to be? Hay to purchase for the year. Cost to purchase hay. If I need 39 tons and it's $100 a ton, then my cost to purchase hay is going to be $3,965. You're like, whoa, that's terrible. What can I do about that? Well, improve your grazing efficiency. Right now, the way I'm doing it, my carrying capacity is 11. But if I could improve my grazing efficiency to 60%, my carrying capacity goes up to 15. So if I'm selling animals on the market, that's 4 more animals that I can run through a sale barn. If I'm selling, carcasses on the hook, that's 4 more carcasses that I can sell on the hook. And that's a management. That is something that we do. That's your brain in your hands. I'm going to rotate those cattle every day. Sometimes it's a checkbook consideration. You're like, what? My job, I can't do that every day. Okay, you can buy a bat latch. If you Google, anybody knows what a bat latch is? Okay, it's not complicated. It's expensive, but it's not complicated. Somebody in New Zealand figured out you put a timer in a box with a hook, and when the timer's up, the hook unreleases. So you do an electric wire like Mike did. Generally, you get one that's got the spring on it, and you put cattle in this field, and you set a 12-hour timer, and 12 hours later it goes bing. The cattle don't hear the spring, but they hear the bing, and they'll right to the next field. So you're getting a 12-hour rotation, and you only have to go there once a day. Or you can do it a 2-day rotation. But there's opportunities to make improvements, and it doesn't always have to be, people get mad, I can't leave my job. You don't have to. We've always got alternatives. This is where the internet is your friend. I got to be careful as a parent, but in this case, the internet is your friend. But this is the last page of Kentucky Graze. You can sit at your kitchen table and play. Maybe I want to do goats. I'll pray for you. They have their place. I think goats are fantastic, and I think they're a powerful tool. But keeping them in, we've always heard the saying, it's like herding cats. Well, it should be, it's like herding goats. And that's why they call it a goat roping, if you've ever heard that phrase either. But maybe I don't want to do cattle, I want to do sheep. Okay, I can make a strong argument for sheep. There's a picture of me in my parents' house. Anybody know what a wool pool is? Anybody raise wool sheep? Okay, a wool pool is where you bring your fleeces together. If you're in Australia on a station and you've got 300,000, they shear them, and well, if you're in West Virginia and you've got 40 and somebody else has got 40, to get marketable amounts of fleeces, you bring them together and pool your fleeces. And they put them in these big long cotton sacks, and the sacks are about 8 feet tall. And they pick the dumbest child there and they throw him down in the sack, and then the child stomps wearing everybody else's boots to get the lanolin from the fleece to waterproof your boots for a few months. And so the picture of me is in the sack. So you can figure out where I ranked on the academic scale. But there's opportunities for everything. It's just, where do you want to go with it? What do you want to do? So here's a tool. It's online. You can go to FOTG, Kentucky Graze. It's compatible with smartphones, tablets, desktops, laptops. So what I've found to be amazing is I pull up to somebody's farm and they come out of the house with a tablet under their arm, which isn't unheard of, but we jump into Kubota and away we go. And then out comes a tablet. And they're like, and we start going through the numbers. And then I start doing step point. And I'm like, well, let's see, there's lots of categories of forages. So which one do you really fit in? You think you're fescue tall fescue red clover, maybe you've got more orchard grass there than you think. Maybe you don't. Maybe you put orchard grass and you just got more tall fescue than you think. But we can start taking a walk, and then we're making changes on the fly. It's like everything. It's like conservation plan. It's a living document. If I make a change, it comes out on this page. Maybe the truth is you're a little overstocked. Maybe the truth is you've got some room to add some more livestock. So then you can decide, do I want to retain some of the ones that I've raised here, or do I want to buy new to get new genetics? A lot of things to think about. Alice, you recognize that picture? Were you there? Okay. So, some of our take-home message, number one is you never know where I'm going to show up. I didn't know who was going to be in this room today, but I knew today. It's about 2 weeks ago when I got the agenda with the names. But I'm like, wait a second, I've been to a lot of these farms, which also makes me feel really old. But the top ones are federal agencies, NRCS, Farm Services Agency, Agricultural Marketing Service. So you're producing something. What are you going to do with it? If you're involved in hemp, you probably know painfully well that the product was great, production was great. There wasn't the ability to, the marketing and the actual production of a product from a plant was behind. But there's a lot of federal agencies out there to help you. Risk Management Agency, that's your insurance. So there's lots of different alternatives. If you're entering into a new venture, maybe you want to hedge your bets for a few years and buy some insurance. Once again, Google's your friend. There's lots of USDA. If you go to USDA Organic, you can get lists of federal agencies that are there to help you. You have a lot of here in Kentucky, we've got a lot of state level organizations. You're here with Oak, UK and KSU. There's Third Thursday things. How many of you have been to a Third Thursday event here? There's 2 or 3 of you. Okay. Third Thursday of every month, they have an event in this building. Well, it's on this farm. Sometimes it's out. But that's the concept is somebody speaks, and then maybe you go out to the field and you look at something. But it's a free event. It's, show up, learn. And maybe it's something you look at and you're like, I've always thought that seemed interesting, and now I don't want to do that at all. That's a valid point. Kentucky Department of Agriculture, if you want to transition to organic and get your certification, you're going to get to know them well. The Kentucky Dairy Development Council, Kentucky Cattlemen's Association, Kentucky Conservation Districts, Kentucky Forage and Grassland Council. Every one of those on that list has events throughout the year. And educate yourself is important. Make new contacts. If you're going into livestock agriculture, opportunity to who's got what breed of hair sheep, who's got what breed of chickens, who's actually getting this kind of growth rate. What are you doing to be able to consistently have twins with your ewes? How are you weaning calves that weigh 700 pounds? Look across the room, look out, somebody talks about what they're doing. Somebody's doing bale grazing. At the end of the meeting, say, hey, how are you doing that? There's a lot of knowledge that doesn't come from people like me. It comes from the people that are doing it every day. Avail yourself of that. And then the internet, enough said, it can be a great thing. Growing up without the internet, it's amazing. And then having a child and you're like, wait a second, there's a whole lot of stuff I don't. So, okay. Any questions? Yeah. That was a rough play. If you can see this, There was nothing in that lot to eat. And it was a tough day because the landowners just, they had been to some workshops. I've got a grazing system. You do. But it belongs to Jenny Craig or Weight Watchers. I mean, your cows are losing weight. They're not gaining weight. And so you lace up your boots and you start taking a walk. You're like, look, here's some tips. Here's what we can do. And I said, I'll be back in 3 months. Well, 90 days, see what works. We had to make some changes at our watering system, but we got them 99. So 9 months later, we had a functioning grazing system, and I couldn't find a spinous process. I couldn't find ribs. We went from cows that, I'm kind of nervous somebody might call animal welfare to, it took them 9 months, but they fleshed out nice and about 80% calving rate. First year of working with us, I was pretty impressed. We turned the corner pretty fast on that one. So, yes?
Are there some cost share programs on the warm season grass establishment?
Absolutely. All three. So my advice to you is apply for all three. Whatever county you're in, say I want to apply for CAPE, I want to apply for state cost share, I want to apply for EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentive Program. In some cases you can do all three applications in the same office. A lot of places it's not, like your extension office does CAPE and your conservation district has EQIP and state cost share. But apply for all three. At that point, if you get 3 letters that say congratulations you've been funded, congratulations you've been funded, congratulations you've been funded, you're in the catbird seat at that point because you get to choose who's going to reimburse me at the best rate to do what I want to do.
One thing you can do on that is get it funded through EQIP or state cost share. Like state cost share is 75%. EQIP is about an acre or something.
Yeah.
When you get it, also get approved by CAPE, for what state cost share EQIP doesn't pay for, you can turn that in on your CAPE.
Yep.
And is it every other year?
Each county's different. EQIP is every year. State cost share is every year and any time. There's no window. You can January the 1st, December 31st. Any time in between those two, you can walk in and apply for EQIP. Now, we will batch them because you all see this. You all know this as much about the federal government as I do. We wrestle with the budget, so our fiscal year starts October the 1st. And so we have to wait till they say your budget is this many dollars, and then we're like, okay, how many applications do we have? Let's work them. And then we say, okay, this took care of 40% of our money. So how many applications have we received since we took our arms and put them around the first bundle? And we just kind of move down the line. But every year you can apply for EQIP. Every year you can apply for state cost share. CAPE is, they'll have a window. They'll publish it in the Cattleman's newsletter or the Extension newsletter or somewhere, Facebook, and say, for the next 2 weeks, we're accepting CAPE applications. But yes, apply for all three. There's a great opportunity. You'll have to adjust your livestock numbers for a little while because to establish native warm season grasses, there's several techniques. Since you're setting in here, you're probably not going to use a lot of herbicide. You can, but then that kind of runs against the organic policies. But you can do things like smother, so you can put a smother crop, so you can take what you've got, graze it down to the nub, and I do mean to the nub, smother it with an annual, and then come back the following May and seed the native warm season grass that you want to.
I'm working on getting my farm number. Are there any grants that you can get without a farm number?
CAPE, you could probably apply for CAPE without a farm number, but state cost share does have a farm number box, and EQIP absolutely has a farm number box.
Yeah.
But that shouldn't, how long have you been waiting? Because that shouldn't be more than about a 2-week process.
I'm not waiting for the application. I have to wait until we get the last part of our deed.
Okay, yes, that's true. I was saying, you scared me because I thought if you've taken a deed in and haven't gotten something back within about 2 weeks, then tell me the county and I'll call on your behalf because that's about a 2-week process. Okay, I understand now, but I got nervous. I thought, well, I'll call for you if I had to.
How do you manage undesirable species? So for example, we have sheep, and we have a lot of Lespedeza. So they'll eat all the things they like. They'll get it down to under 4 inches. So I'll want to move them, but then the Lespedeza gets tall and woody and goes to seed. So would you recommend move them when what they like is 4 inches and then come back and mow the Lespedeza afterwards?
Yeah, some sort of a mechanical treatment.
Okay.
Now, Lespedeza is kind of a blessing and a curse because it's a great anti-worm or anti-helminthic. It's got the tannins in it that have some benefits, but yeah, it is stemmy and
They like it when it's young.
They like it when it's young. So yeah, at that point you're gonna have to do some sort of mechanical treatment.
Okay. I don't know how to tell the difference. I'm new to all this, so is there an easy way to tell the difference?
Is it bushy or is it just a straight stem?
It's a straight stem.
Okay, that's Ceresia.
Okay. Is that good or bad?
Yeah. It's kind of funny you mentioned Ceresia lespedeza. Talk about all the grants. Different groups have grants. We've heard a lot about different opportunities, climate smart grants and bale grazing grants. Well, there's in eastern Kentucky on the abandoned mine lands, reclaimed coal mine lands, there's a big sheep grazing project. And that's when they called me out. They said we need to do some forage evaluation. This is what we want to do. And I said, you're turning them out. You're going to have some problems with worms. And I said, having some Lespedeza. Well, we had lots of Lespedeza, and you're right. As we went in the spring, boy, they hammered it hard. And then when we gave them plenty of rest, the pastures, sheep didn't eat rest, but the pastures did, and it came back stemmy, but they still ate it pretty well. Okay. So if you're thinking about getting into sheep and want to do more of just a range type sheep, a Basque, if you will, where they've got a shepherd that lives with the sheep, moves them with dogs every day. There's a big project. You can kind of catch some information. Southeast Sheep, CCASH, Southeast Sheep Association. But their goal was eventually to get to about 3,000 head being rotationally grazed without fence. They've got some shepherds that stay with them, live with the herd. They move them every day. They bring them back to a fold, the classic sheep fold every night for predator control. With the advent of game cameras, it's kind of fascinating. The semis arrived, they unloaded the sheep. And I'm sure if you're a wild animal, that's a whole new smell. And that second night, they had 3 bears and 9 coyotes that passed by that camera to investigate sheep. And this is in Perry County. So it was, I asked the young man privately, I'm careful what I say in a group, but I asked him, I said, are you carrying a gun? He said, yeah. Yeah, he said, I see coyotes every day. And he said, about once a week, I'll see a bear. And he said, I don't think I'm ever gonna have any trouble, but he said, I'm out here by myself 4 days at a time. And I said, yeah, it's not a bad idea. Yeah.
Yeah, if y'all haven't worked in RCS, you're missing out, because thanks to RCS, I managed to put city water in every one of my pastures, and also interior fencing for rotational grazing. They like to work with rotational grazers. Another thing, talking about your chain hiring and frost seeding, well, I won't want to mention the frost seeding, but if you do bale grazing and you want to implement clovers or legumes into your pastures, if you get them off there mid-February and go in and sow clover and stuff, do a soil test, make sure your pH is 6.2 or higher. It's a great time to go in and frost seed for any kind of legume, especially white and red clover. If you can get it this year, I understand white and red clover this year is going to be extremely hard to get due to the droughts and stuff out west. If you can't get them off of it till, say, April or whatever, then you could also still sow it, and then maybe go in there with the chain hire and run over top of it just to get some dirt on top of it. But with bale grazing, that is a good opportunity to get legumes into your pasture if you're going to keep the cows off of it for a year or two and go to another field to bale graze. Because sometimes it takes clover a year to establish and come up. So you don't want to spend your money if you're going to bale graze it again that following year. So That was all I wanted to add to it. Oh, another thing too, the bow Renfro structure, the feed pad that I showed you on mine, you can also get those put in through NRCS and state cost share. But if you think about putting one in, you got to keep in mind you got to have access to 2 pastures from it. You can't just put it out in the middle of a field and say, I'm going to use this one field. It's got to have at least 2 pastures. Is it still that way, Adam?
Say that again.
Your bow Renfro structures, if you put one in, you got to have access to at least 2 fields from it.
At least 2.
Yeah.
Like to be 3 or 4.
3, yeah, but they,
And then we can do what you've done, put an animal trail walkway.
yeah.
To allow them to move between
Yeah.
pastures to come in and eat.
I don't know if y'all noticed the gravel runway I had behind mine, but I can go to 4 different fields from my feed pad, just by opening and closing the gate. So.
Anyone else have any questions? I don't know if that's going through. Does anyone else have anything else they want to ask these gentlemen? No? Okay. Thank you guys. All 3 of you have done just a wonderful job today. Everybody give Adam and Mike and Dylan a round of applause. And I think that, is it raining outside? Should we go outside to the? Well, let's. Please. Is it raining hard?
Did it start coming down harder again? I had hoped we might be able to get out and do a quick exercise out in the field, but doesn't look like that's going to happen today. That's all right. I'll take just a minute. Adam did a great job talking about NRCS and all the things they do. I mentioned that I work with Mount Folly Enterprises. We got some representatives here in the room. We also got a Climate Smart Farming grant, and we're working with different farmers, but our focus is on cattle farmers. We're using NRCS practices, but we pay out a little bit differently than the NRCS, and so we're trying to position ourselves as an easy first step to get some folks into, and we're in the very beginning stages of starting a Kentucky-based beef company. The idea is to keep them in this side of the river right here in our state, and we're currently using our grant to try to build some of those relationships with beef farmers that may want to work with us. So without going into too much detail, Alice is here, Jessony's here, I'm here. I'm happy to answer questions now if you'd like. I've got a lot of cards. All these have a little, what do you call that thing on the back? You can just scan it so you can give it to your friend. QR code, that's it. Yeah, that'll get you on our radar. If you get on our radar, I'll be calling you sometime within the next couple of weeks to do some farm visits. See if we could help you get a little bit of money to do some of the infrastructure that you want. Again, we're using NRCS practices, but we're paying in different ways. So a lot of the folks we're working with are able to get our grant, as well as continuing to do some NRCS cost shares. So if you are getting NRCS payments, it doesn't necessarily mean that we couldn't work with you. Just call us. We'll figure that out. Chances are that we can in one way or another. And we're going to try to keep more of the value of Kentucky grass and Kentucky beef here in our state, which is something that we think is pretty important. So if anybody has any questions about that, you can ask me now or track me down. I'll be here all weekend. You'll probably see some of these laying around. I plan on just dropping them off at tables through the rest of the weekend. If you don't get a chance to talk to me, just scan that or read that, and we'd love to talk to you more.
Is this going to be certified organic, or is it just?
You do not need to be certified organic in order to work with us at all, no. Yeah, we do have some certified organic producers in our network, but the vast majority of our livestock producers, as you know, are not certified organic, even those of us that utilize organic methods exclusively. Yep.
I think we're done.
Yeah, I think we're kind of done. If anybody wants to hang around and talk, I'm happy to do that. If we could have gotten out in the field, we would have easily gone till 5, but people probably want to stretch their legs, maybe use the bathroom. If anybody's hanging around, just grab one of us if you would like to continue the conversation. And thank you, everyone, for coming.